Good morning, everybody. I welcome all councillors and members of the public to the latest meeting of the Northamptonshire Executive, including all those watching the meeting via live stream on YouTube. Members are reminded to keep your microphones muted unless invited to speak. I'd first also like to welcome Councillor Chris Kellett to the Executive. Chris shares our ambition to be an exemplary council, delivering the very best for vulnerable and elderly people in Northamptonshire and giving dignity to our elderly in their latter years. You're most welcome, Councillor Kellett. So we come to agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you very much, Chair. We've just received one today, and that's Cornelia Undercut, Executive Director of Children's Services. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Agenda item 2, the minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of April 2026. Seems a long time ago. The minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of April are set out on pages 5 to 20 of the agenda pack. Are there any comments in respect of their accuracy? Did I? Sorry. Okay. Yeah. None? Thank you. Please may I have a mover and seconder to approve the minutes? Councillor Kirk Harrison to move, Councillor Ken Harrington to second. The approval of the minutes have been moved and seconded. Please may I have a show of hands for those in favour?
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Well, I'll sign those now. Thank you very much. So now we come to agenda item 3, which is the members' declaration of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from members? I'm looking round. I can't see any. If that could be noted. Officers, thank you. Agenda item 4, notification of requests to address the meeting. We have received requests to speak on agenda items 7 to 15. Given the volume of requests to speak for item 7, the Empowerment Fund review, I have decided to take this as the first substantive item of business on the agenda. And as communicated to all those registering to speak on this item, extended the overall time limit for statements on this item from 15 to 30 minutes. The speakers will be invited to address the Executive in turn at the appropriate point in accordance with Part 2, Paragraph 8.1.2 of the Constitution. Speakers are reminded that participation at Executive is limited to statements only, which may be taken into account following officer representation of the report and during member debate. We'll come to those items and speakers individually. And so now we move straight to agenda item 7, which is the Empowerment Fund review. And I'd like to start by inviting Councillor Jim Hakewell to address the meeting as Chair of Corporate Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you, Leader, for enabling me to speak today in my role as Chairman of Corporate Scrutiny, as you just said. Excuse me. You've heard varying viewpoints in relation to the issue this morning, and I won't repeat those viewpoints. They'll be coming up, I'm sure, from members of the community. The review of the Enablement Fund has received significant community and councillor interest, along with several reports to both Executive and Corporate Scrutiny Committees over the past few weeks. I take it as read that these reports and minutes have been taken into consideration in the lead-up to today's meeting. Corporate Scrutiny met on the 27th of April and debated the implications of change to the empowerment scheme. When asked about the scrutiny debate, I have referred colleagues and those contributing via social media to watch the recorded debate on YouTube to get the background to our debate and conclusions that night. There were rightly and properly differing views expressed at our meeting. All members were enabled to speak freely, and we came to the recommendations set out in your papers at section 5.1 and our conclusions at 5.3, along with a more detailed record at 7.6.1 and our final conclusion at 7.6.2, all shown, Leader, in your papers today. There was unanimous support for the funding for the Youth Advisory Council to be allocated, and it was a pleasure to meet a delegation of young people on the night to know that they were interested, and indeed interested to watch the entire debate. That's good news. The committee was appreciative that Councillor Conway, Chair of Place and Environment Scrutiny Committee, attended and spoke on this item on that night, as well as Executive Committee councillors Cheatley, Griffiths, Harrison and McGiffin, took the time to come along and listen in person as representatives of the Executive Committee, and I thank you for that. Corporate Scrutiny thanks you. Attending scrutiny meetings, or as a Councillor Fairhall did by circulating his comments in writing prior to the committee meeting, is open to all councillors, as is registering to speak by members of the community. The role of scrutiny is to add the views of non-executive councillors to future policy decisions in a timely manner, using the procedures laid down in the Council's constitution. I'm personally satisfied that we have achieved this on corporate scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Hakewell. I'd now like to invite Councillor Emily Fedorovich to address the meeting. Emily, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak. So I'm asking this executive today to reconsider this proposal, because what is being presented is not only deeply damaging to our communities, but it's also entirely at odds with the recommendations of this council's own scrutiny process. Why send a decision to scrutiny to completely ignore the outcome? To be clear, the original proposal was to cut community funding in half to offer some to the Youth Council. Funding our youth is long overdue following decades of cuts to youth provision, but this amount, whilst it might seem a lot to those in the Youth Council, is a fraction of what we need to be investing in young people. £1,000 per area that needs a youth club is not going to go very far. It is a token amount compared to what is really needed. Listening to young people and turning their feedback into strategic decisions backed with meaningful budget is what's helpful. Slicing up an already tiny pot of community funding rather than funding things properly is unfair to both our young people and the voluntary groups who are already stretched. Youth could be sustainably funded through strategic savings. Known high-spend areas still remain under-scrutinised, and developer contributions have not been used to their full potential. Now, the community funding is proposed to be cut altogether, absorbed back into the council coffers as a so-called saving. Let me be clear, this is not a saving. The Institute of Volunteering Research shows that every £1 invested in voluntary sector organisations generates over £5 of value. Cutting this funding to absorb what is a negligible amount to us means a real-world net loss of over £250,000 that will be felt across Northamptonshire. This is not a small decision. This is a deep and far-reaching one that will break trust in this authority and hit people hard right at a time when things couldn't be tougher. The grassroots groups that also utilise this pot often cannot access any other funding. This is the most accessible funding available, and cutting this means a huge number of hyper-local community projects just won't get off the ground. Gaps won't be filled, isolation and poverty will increase. This money will never be seen again, and local people stand to suffer here. In the context of a council budget of £432 million, this amount is very small, but to community groups, it's transformational. The funding has supported schools and nursery projects, food banks, food parcels, mental health support, send parent groups, community gardens, village halls, defibrillators, support for elderly residents. I could go on, but the point is that these are not abstract lines on a spreadsheet, these are real people. And your decision today determines their future. This message this proposal sends is that community support is expendable, and I don't believe that reflects the values of us in this room. I ask you to protect this funding and to deeply consider those it will affect if you remove it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I would remind Councillor Fedorovich that we do invest very heavily in voluntary organisations through Aspire. So now I'd like to invite Councillor Steve Geary to address the meeting. Steve, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Any proposed savings that we're looking to make, whilst maintaining or even improving council services, is always welcomed. In this case, the proposed savings amount to about 1/6,000th of the council budget. Not an awful lot. This proposal, in my opinion, fails to maintain or improve council services. It's cutting the ability of councils and community groups and charities to support our people. It's not great. You will be hearing and listening to a number of people who really struggle with the reasoning behind this, who operate in areas of the greatest need. Any support in that area is really desperately needed, and none of us are happy to take decisions like this. But these groups are out there continuing to support the needy regardless of what money is available, but the less that's available, the less that they're able to support those people. And these proposals, in my opinion, aren't helping us to be a sustainable county. They're in danger of making us a suffering one. And whilst I trust these decisions aren't easily taken, I do struggle a bit where 1/6,000th of the budget has been looked at with this degree of effort and cost, and that saving is not really going to change the weather. So I'm afraid I must mention the old saying, it's a bit penny wise really, and it's certainly pound foolish. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Geary. I'd now like to invite Councillor David Baker to address the meeting. David, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this agenda item. I will start off by briefly saying that I was in fact in favour of the original proposal to run with the Members' Empowerment Fund, but with half of the previous funding in conjunction with a new Youth Advisory Council scheme with the other half of that funding. But the recommendation now in front of Executive today does not have my support for various reasons. However, with that said, I will focus on providing some constructive comments for feeding into the design process for such a new scheme to be established by the grants team working in conjunction with the Youth Advisory Council if you decide today to accept the recommendation in the papers. I understand that the Youth Advisory Council has already asked to present their proposals for any such new scheme to scrutiny, and that they are extremely keen to work with members and to consult. That is very positive and is indeed very welcome. But since not all of us are members of scrutiny, I would strongly request that there is an opportunity for all councillors to feed into the design phase of the procedure that will ultimately be developed for any such new scheme, and that councillors are able to share their views with the Youth Advisory Council on the shaping of any new scheme ahead of being finalised for consideration by scrutiny. For example, in my opinion, it is vitally important that ward members have the opportunity to be involved in the application to any new scheme for projects that are in their ward. Applications shouldn't be developed and submitted in isolation of the ward members. It would be entirely reasonable, in my opinion, to suggest that ward members either have some ability to submit applications to any such new scheme themselves, or at the very least to discuss them in advance with the Youth Advisory Council members in their area. With that very much in mind, therefore, and if it has not already happened, I would request that the members of the Youth Advisory Council are strongly recommended to reach out to the ward members in the areas that they cover. Unless I'm mistaken,
30 seconds.
Those in Wellingborough have not reached out to myself. There is a clear need for cooperation and liaison between the Youth Advisory Council and ward members. And I would therefore welcome a recommendation today that officers reach out to them, that they reach out to the ward members in the areas that they cover, so that these discussions can commence. Again, if you accept the recommendation in front of you in the agenda papers today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Baker, and as always, you make some very valid points. I'd now like to invite Councillor... I do apologise. I'd now like to invite Councillor Jonathan Carvetta to address the meeting. Councillor Carvetta, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this item. I want to begin by recognising the intention behind the Ward Member Empowerment Fund, as set out in paragraphs 4.1 to 4.3 of the report. It was introduced to give councillors flexibility and discretion to respond to hyperlocal issues, and many colleagues have used it positively. However, as paragraph 2.1 makes clear, the review was always about assessing impact, value for money, affordability and sustainability, and the evidence shows that this change is required. The utilisation data at paragraph 4.4 to 4.6 demonstrates persistent underspend. Even in the fund's most active year, more than £50,000 remained unused. This cannot be explained solely by boundary changes or transitional issues. Taken over time, it indicates that the scheme has not delivered consistent or equitable outcomes relative to its administrative costs. Paragraph 3.4 makes clear that operating both the Ward Member Empowerment Fund and a new Youth Empowerment Grant Scheme concurrently will incur additional staffing and administration costs of around £20,000, which are not budgeted for in 26 to 27. From an efficiency and transformative perspective, running two discretionary schemes parallel is neither proportionate nor sustainable, particularly when core services are under significant pressure. The core proposal set out in paragraph 2.2, 3.2 and 5.10 onwards is not about removing empowerment, but redirecting it. The proposed Youth Empowerment Grant Scheme aligns with the corporate priority of family, focuses on early intervention and prevention, and enables young people to influence funding decisions directly. The expected impacts are clearly set out in paragraph 5.15. Importantly, paragraph 5.12 confirms the scheme will be co-designed with the Youth Advisory Council, and paragraph 7.2.2 confirms it will operate within the existing small grants policy, ensuring appropriate governance and oversight. In conclusion, the recommendations of paragraph 3.1 provide a balanced outcome. £68,000 reinvested in a strategic youth-focused scheme, £68,000 returned to the general fund as an in-year saving. This is not a withdrawal from community investment. It is a refocusing to maximise impact and value for money. It is an evidence-led and financially responsible decision. For those reasons, I support the recommendation and I encourage colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
And thank you very much for that, Jonathan. I'd now like to invite Councillor Simon Fairhall to address the meeting. Simon, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement.
Thank you. I was due to speak at the last executive meeting on this matter to support the establishment of the Youth Fund, even though it resulted in halving of the Ward Empowerment Scheme for 26-27. But it made sense, based on the numbers, and was going to positively apply a regular underspend. I was going to argue, though, for continuation of the scheme into future years, which was somewhat hidden in the depths of the document then before the executive. So I was pleased, therefore, the matter was deferred to scrutiny in response to our request that it be properly considered, reflecting the original proposal when the new scheme arrangements were agreed in June last year. The Scrutiny Committee meeting was hugely disappointing, though. I, unfortunately, was unable to make it. I submitted a response in advance, which was partly answered, although the subsequent contribution of one member of the committee confirmed my view that the scheme wasn't well promoted and councillors successfully briefed. Then we had the confusion, an initial reminisce to the good old days when they were the administration and the scheme was wonderful, but now a suggestion that it was misused and included poor quality applications. Then goading of the leader to abandon the scheme immediately, before then proposing it be extended for a full year, despite officer guidance that it would increase costs. In between times, her deputy praised the scheme. But more surprising was the absence of any other contribution from those who prefer to campaign through the media, despite declaring on social media, I will be taking your views to the scrutiny panel where this is going to be discussed and make sure your views are heard loud and clear. I've watched and attended enough of these executive meetings to be in little doubt that in about half an hour's time we'll hear the announcement, unanimous chair, as the ward empowerment scheme is ended, albeit presented as a new youth scheme celebrated. For the avoidance of doubt, I will be disappointed by that decision and the opportunity to support new and different small applications each year as a ward councillor. But I'd also wish to flag, and this fact has been largely missed in all the coverage so far, that over 5 years, £362,000 from this scheme has not been distributed to our local communities, which I think is a massive loss to the voluntary and community sector, a real opportunity missed for the fabulous impact and outcomes that they deliver. It's shocking. It's sadly an indictment on our performance as councillors and challenges any notion that we at NNC value our voluntary community faith and social enterprise sector. Although I hope that my concerns will be assuaged by the action in the annual delivery plan, COMO 604, which plans to support and monitor the voluntary and community sector throughout 2026, helping local organisations access funding, strengthen their volunteer programmes and build capacity to deliver community projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that excellent timing. I'd now like to invite David Wilmot to address the meeting. David, can I see David Wilmot? Okay, that means we might be able to get a sub in, see how time goes. So I'd now be delighted to welcome Anne Lee to address the meeting. Anne, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the Executive, I speak today as a former member of this Council, not to criticise, but to appeal to your shared responsibility as custodians of this Council and its communities. Over the years, the Member Empowerment Fund has enabled councillors to respond swiftly and sensitively to local needs. Real residents whose lives were improved through small but meaningful interventions. In my 10 years as a Kettering district and then North councillor, the most palpable difference I made as a backbench councillor, aside from casework, was by being able to respond to local funding needs from a nursery group, the Sea Cadets, Homestad and the Grange Resource Centre in Kettering. Scrutiny rightly highlighted that the Empowerment Fund plays a unique role in supporting local groups which often lack the capacity to navigate larger, centralised grant schemes. Removing this fund risks creating a gap that no alternative mechanism currently fills. Scrutiny offers you a balanced path to retain the Member Empowerment Fund for a full 12 months while still establishing the youth scheme. This approach honours both your commitment to the next generation and your duty to the communities that you serve today. Abolishing the fund entirely sends an unintended message that the smallest groups and the most local voices are no longer a priority. I do not believe that that reflects the values of this Council. I urge the Executive to consider the long-term implications and to choose a course that strengthens your connection to the communities you represent, while enabling backbench councillors to make a real difference in their own community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So we move on. I'd now like to invite Lee Foster to address the meeting. Lee, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. The Empowerment Fund, it basically does what it says on the tin. It empowers volunteers and organisations to carry out necessary work in the community that should, in some instances, be undertaken by this very council itself. Corby has always been a town built on community spirit, but community spirit alone is not enough. Our local groups need practical support, and the Empowerment Fund has been one of the few ways that grassroots organisations and individuals could access funds to survive, start up and to grow. Across Corby, this funding has helped community centres stay open, supported youth projects, funded local events, reduced isolation and created opportunities for people who are too often forgotten. These are not extras or luxuries. They are essential services that strengthen our communities and improve people's lives. Take Corby Wombles, for example, who receive empowerment funding for equipment, enabling more Corby residents to get out and improve their area, whilst improving their health and well-being through exercise and socialising with others. The hundreds of positive comments that the Wombles get every time they post on social media shows how much community appreciates them. Then there is also the financial savings to the council. The Wombles probably save this council tens of thousands of pounds every year, as do other volunteers and community organisations in Corby. This proposal is short-sighted. Prevention is always cheaper than crisis management. Every youth project that keeps young people engaged, every community initiative reducing loneliness, every local support group helping vulnerable residents saves public money further down the line in policing, social care and health services. I urge the council to listen to the people of Corby, think about the initiatives and vital work that the volunteers and organisations may never get to do to improve their communities, like the Corby Wombles, St John's Ambulance and many other groups and individuals who have done in the past with the help of this Empowerment Fund. I'll leave you with a quote from the leader of Northamptonshire talking about the Northampton Day project just last year. He said, "We are committed to nurturing community spirit and spotlighting local strengths, and this event is a fantastic step forward in that journey." So if that is true, and that this council is serious about empowering communities, then I believe this decision to scrap this funding avenue is a big step in the wrong direction for Corby and the rest of Northamptonshire. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. We're moving on. I'd now like to invite Dorothy Maxwell to address the meeting. Dorothy, as always, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement.
Good morning. As a former councillor of 10 years for both ENC and NNC, I use the empowerment money with residents in my ward to help their communities. You either worked with your colleagues in spending the money or acted individually as a councillor. But the residents were always involved. Giving the councillors just 3 months to spend it, then shut it down, is completely unacceptable, because this prevents the residents having a say in how it's spent. In 2022, 23, 24, 25, my empowerment funds were used on the following: a gate for disabled people to access the fields in Great Addington, equipment for scouts in Earthenborough, £1,000 on books to help children read, a concrete table tennis table in Crow Hill, with residents funding the groundwork and myself the bats and balls since 2025, and 3 mature trees for a young people's garden. The items have been a great success, particularly helping young people from poor backgrounds. What you're doing is preventing young people having a say in their community, at the same time giving a voice to council taxpayers about how their money is spent on the council. Sadly, this council is going backwards on its word to have a democratic society where residents have a say in their area of NNC. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for that, Dorothy. It's interesting that the majority of the excellent schemes that you mentioned are in relation to young people, hence part of the recommendation that is before Executive today. I'd now like to move on and invite Lynn Buckingham to address the meeting. Lynn, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak once more. Chair, I welcome the investment in young people and the principle of the Youth Empowerment Grant Scheme. Giving young people a voice in local funding decisions is absolutely the right direction of travel. However, I do think the report misses an important gap analysis. Many large towns already have parish or town council grant schemes and stronger community infrastructure, but many smaller towns and villages do not. For some communities, this Ward Member Empowerment Fund was the only accessible source of small-scale local funding. The concern is that while £68,000 is being redirected into youth investment, the other 68 is simply being removed as an in-year saving. I also think that we should recognise the enormous value of community volunteers and grassroots organisation who often bring external funding into areas at very little cost to the council itself. So if this fund is being withdrawn, we need proper support in place, including training for councillors and community groups around alternative grant funding opportunities, filling in of grant applications, and making the business case. Otherwise, the biggest impact may fall on communities with the fewest existing resources. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Lynn. Actually, you make a really good point about making sure that our parishes and our town councils, who do an amazing job for their communities, fully understand how they can go about getting funding, and the funding schemes that we have, the funding schemes I mentioned earlier about Inspire, and also larger schemes can be tapped into. So thank you for making that very valid point. So now we can move on to those that had registered to speak and we weren't sure whether we'd had time. So I can now ask Councillor Julie Lumsden to address the meeting. Julie, you have 3 minutes to make your statement when you get to the front, if you're able to. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Executive. I'm well aware we do have to look at costs, and the public purse has to be scrutinised fully. I do feel this, I haven't made a speech, this is coming from here, here and here. I do feel the way this is going, vital funding will be taken away from certain areas. Some areas maybe haven't utilised the Empowerment Fund fully. They maybe didn't need it as much as some other areas that have. I know in my ward we did work across party and we did fully utilise it last year, and some good causes were funded. I'm also fully aware that our young people do need to have a voice, and I do think they should have some funding and it should be spent where they think it should be spent. But as Councillor Baker said earlier, I believe it should be brought together, ward councillors and the youth council working together, whether that be half and half of the fund or whether it be youth council using what hasn't been utilised by ward councillors. Ward councillors are elected democratically by their residents because they know the area, they know what funding is needed in that area. Therefore, I would hope the executive will reconsider some of these suggestions. Thank you.
And thank you very much for that. Councillor Ben Jameson isn't here, so we'll move on to the next speaker, and that is Sil Paul. Sil, you have a maximum 3 minutes to make your statement.
I'm speaking tonight as a person of Corby who cares deeply about communities and about the local organisations, volunteers who work tirelessly every single day to support people across our town. I want to speak about the Ward Member Empowerment Fund and why I strongly believe it should be protected and continued. I understand and appreciate the importance of investing in youth services and wider community programmes. Young people absolutely deserve opportunities, support and investment, especially at the time when many families and communities are facing increasing pressures. But I do not believe that supporting youth initiatives should come at the expense of a Ward Member Empowerment Fund, because this fund serves a completely different purpose and one that is incredibly important to the local communities. The Ward Member Empowerment Fund allows local ward councillors to respond directly to the needs of the communities they represent, give councillors the ability to support grassroots organisations, local projects, volunteer groups and community initiatives in a practical and immediate way. And a local connection matters. Councillors who represent wards know their communities better than anyone else. They know where support is needed most. They know which youth groups are struggling to stay open, which community centres are under pressure, which organisations are making a real difference, and where even a small amount of funding could have a major impact. A centrally managed fund or a large-scale programme cannot always see those smaller local issues. In the same way, that is why the Ward Member Empowerment Fund is so valuable. It keeps local councillors hands-on, actively involved and improving their own areas rather than everything becoming centralised and more distant from the communities affected. And often the funding involved is relatively small, but the impact is huge. A small grant might help the youth club continue activities for young people, might help a food bank support struggling families, it might fund activities that reduce loneliness amongst elderly residents, it might support local sports clubs, mental health groups or community events that bring people together and strengthens pride in our neighbourhood. Without that support, many grassroots organisations would struggle to survive. As a resident, I think we need to think carefully about what happens if funding like this disappears, because the effects are often gradual and easy to overlook at first. A local project quietly closes, a volunteer group scales back because costs become too high.
30 seconds.
A youth activity disappears, a community event no longer happens. Then later we ask why loneliness is increasing, why young people feel disconnected and why pressures on services keep growing. Without recognising that some of these very things prevented, those problems were slowly removed. The Ward Member Empowerment Fund is preventative investment. It strengthens communities before problems become bigger and more expensive to deal with later.
Thank you very much for that and the excellent timing. I applaud all speakers for their time control. It's enabled us to take one more speaker, which will be Councillor David Brackenbury. David, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement.
Thank you, Chair, and particular thanks for squeezing me in, and good morning, everybody. And it is a great disappointment to receive this report and to see the Council recommending the shutting down of what is a much appreciated source of support for communities across Northamptonshire. The proposals set forth in this paper are, as you know, to introduce a scheme to benefit one section of society, namely our youth, and also to return £68,000 to the general account. Saving approximately 0.01% of the Council's net budget is barely a rounding error in the Council's finances. The leader has recently announced with pride that the Reform administration haven't cut a single thing. This ill-conceived measure is a genuine cut for small organisations and groups which cannot always secure funding from elsewhere. The beauty of the Members' Empowerment Fund is that it enables good ward councillors to assist projects that benefit residents across all age ranges. It is worth pointing out that the sums in this paper are small, but the effect on local communities is far-reaching. In the Thrapston ward, we have supported volunteer action, local drivers and volunteers working to address rural isolation. We have provided village notice boards in Titchmarsh, supported improvements in the children's recreation ground in Islip, contributed to speed awareness measures in Barnwell and Titchmarsh, and helped in refreshing the toys in Thrapston Library. They needed it. These are just some of the projects which we have supported over the last few years. The cross-party opposition to these proposals should speak for itself. It is a great shame that a small pot of funding that could be allocated by elected councillors who live in their communities is being removed. Consider the reaction that this paper is causing, and I invite executive members to truly consider whether they should be supporting such a mean-spirited paper. Please do the right thing and vote against this item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, David. I would remind David that the leader and deputy leader of the Conservative group attended the scrutiny committee and no other Conservative councillors chose to attend on the night. Well, now we've come to the end of the contributions from councillors and members of the public. I'd now like to invite Camilla Coulson-Patel, our Director of Law and Governance, to introduce this report. Over to you, Camilla.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for those who've attended today to contribute to the meeting. This report outlines the review and proposals for the future of the empowerment funding. The Ward Member Empowerment Fund is a discretionary fund which was last reviewed by the Executive in June 2025 with an allocated budget of £136,000. In 25-26 financial year, of the £136,000 budget, just over £85,000 was utilised. The application window was extended from the 6th of March 26 to the 31st of March 2026. The policy did not permit the roll forward of any unspent funds, and any unallocated balance has been returned to the General Revenue Fund at the year end. As part of the review, an assessment of the engagement levels and the resource requirements has been undertaken, together with an alignment of the corporate plan and priorities. An earlier recommendation was presented to scrutiny, generally outlining of the £68,000 to be allocated, an allocated budget to be assigned to the grant team, with the Youth Advisory Council to devise and develop a youth grant scheme. To open the Ward Member Empowerment Fund for 26-27 with an application window of 3 months with an allocation of £68,000. The recommendations flowing from the Scrutiny Committee are detailed within the report for exec members to review. Following the scrutiny recommendation, further work was undertaken for the option to run the two funds concurrently. This would require an additional officer capacity, which is anticipated to be in the region of £20,000, for which no budget provision exists for 26-27. The report therefore recommends, as detailed at paragraph 3.1, the withdrawal of the Ward Member Empowerment Fund with immediate effect. Of the £136,000 allocation for 26-27, £68,000 is recommended for the allocation to the grants team to develop with a youth empowerment grants scheme in partnership with the Youth Advisory Council. This will be using the existing small grants policy framework with a target launch date of September 2026. The remaining £68,000 is to be returned to the General Fund. Chair, that's the end of the presentation of the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Camilla. I'd now like to invite member debate from the floor. Councillor Graham Cheatley.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for all of your comments, which I've listened to with real interest. And I have to say there have been some really good points raised. So thank you for all of that. Thank you for Camilla to presenting the report. So this report is about making a clear and positive choice about how we invest in our communities, and particularly how we support the next generation. So let me begin by recognising that the Ward Empowerment Fund has made a real difference in many places. Members have used it to support local groups, respond to local needs, and deliver small but meaningful improvements in their communities. I've used it myself to support a local youth club on Kingswood Ward in Corby. It is entirely understandable that there will be some disappointment that this fund is coming to an end. And I want to put on record that this contribution is genuinely valued. It's also important to recognise that the Ward Member Empowerment Fund is a discretionary fund. And as such, it is right that we review it and reshape it where needed to make sure it delivers the best possible outcomes for our residents. However, our role as an executive is to step back, look at the evidence, and ensure that our funding is delivering the greatest possible impact, aligned to our corporate plan, especially our priority around families and stronger communities. The reality is that this fund has not been used consistently across all wards, and the data does reflect that. Over the past 5 years, a significant amount of funding has remained unspent. I've done the maths, and on average, over £70,000 each year, with recent figures still showing more than a third not being used. So while the fund has supported good local projects, it hasn't always delivered the level of targeted impact that we now need. That is why this proposal is not about removing support, it's about refocusing it where it can make the biggest difference. And this is where I want to say something of my own experience. Before becoming a councillor, I worked in a children's home for 12 months. And what stays with me from that time is just how important it is that young people feel listened to, supported, and safe. Many of those young people just needed someone to believe in them, to help them make better decisions, and to give them hope for the future, and to steer them away from risks of crime, the evils of drugs, and anti-social behaviour. When we invest early in their education in positive activities and in strengthening family relationships, we don't just help individuals, we build stronger, safer communities for everyone. So we're proposing a youth empowerment grant scheme that will do something genuinely different. It will put young people themselves at the heart of decision making. Through the Youth Advisory Council, they will help to shape priorities. They will influence funding decisions and ensure that investment reflects real need in our communities. This directly supports our corporate plan, especially families and stronger communities, by creating more opportunities for young people, supporting early intervention and prevention, tackling the root causes of antisocial behaviour, and building safer, more resilient neighbourhoods. I also want to recognise the role of scrutiny, which has been an important and constructive part of the process. Members raised valid concerns about local flexibility and the impact on councillors' ability to respond to community needs. I attended that corporate scrutiny meeting and listened carefully to those views. That is exactly what scrutiny is there for, and those voices have been heard. And importantly, they have helped shape the proposal we have before us today. This new scheme will also sit within a strong governance framework under our existing small grants policy, ensuring transparency, clear criteria, and proper oversight of public funds. It will be delivered by experienced teams in stronger communities, working alongside children's services, so it is joined up and properly aligned with our wider priorities. Ultimately, we've had to balance local flexibility with financial reality and impact. Running two discretionary schemes is not sustainable, and this approach allows us to focus funding where it matters most, while also delivering a saving of £68,000. So this is a considered decision. It reflects evidence, engagement, and our priorities. And most importantly, it's about being ambitious for our young people, giving them a voice, giving them opportunity, and investing in their future. So we're choosing impact over intention and investing in the future of our communities where it matters most. Chair, I commend this report and its recommendations to Executive. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor, I'll do Councillor Kirk Harrison first, if that's Councillor Kirk Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. And I do want to say thank you for all the public contributions to this item. You perhaps don't realise it, but you have been listened to more than you perhaps realise. So I'm actually happy to second this report. This has clearly been an issue that's generated strong views, both within the chamber and outside it, and I do understand why. Some local groups have benefited from the scheme and I recognise the concerns about bringing it to a close. But alongside those concerns, we have to weigh up wider questions, those of governance, oversight and ultimately financial stewardship. As Councillor Cheatley rightly pointed out, this was always discretionary spending. At a time when this council, like many others up and down the country, faces real financial pressure, increasing demand on statutory services, it's right that we really need to carefully consider whether this remains an appropriate use of our public money. I also want to address fairly directly, if I can, the concerns that communities will lose out. I think the picture's more nuanced than that, so I'd just like to approach this if I can. Again, Councillor Cheatley and indeed many others have pointed out that over the life of this fund, a substantial proportion of the allocated budget has failed to reach communities. And that's really, really important. Ultimately, the funds have returned to the general fund by default rather than benefiting any particular community group. That's evidence. The £68,000 being directed towards the Youth Empowerment Scheme is therefore much more likely to reach communities than the member scheme ever reliably did. And rather than a cut, this is in reality a reallocation of those funds to a more strategic, better governed, more likely to deliver real benefit. It's also worth pointing out that the Youth Council are not the beneficiaries of this scheme. They are to be the administrators and, as the report very clearly points out, to direct the funds. So it's not about one section of our community benefiting over others. The other thing that's important to reflect on is what came back from scrutiny. Yes, the Scrutiny Committee unanimously supported the provision of a youth empowerment scheme. But the suggestion that individual ward members should be able to determine allocations unilaterally raises, for me at least, legitimate governance concerns. The requirement for collective ward agreement was introduced specifically to strengthen oversight and accountability. And moving away from that would, in my view, been a step in the wrong direction. We were also advised that operating both schemes was not deliverable within the existing resources, and we've heard that again today from the monitoring officer. Partial retention was considered by the committee, but scrutiny's own recommendation removed the safeguards that made that option workable. We have to make decisions that are not only desirable in principle, but deliverable in practice. And our responsibility as an executive is not simply to continue things because they're popular or well-intentioned. It's to ensure that our decisions are right and they're proper and they're sustainable and in the long-term interest of this council and the residents that we serve. So for those reasons, I believe this is the correct decision, and I hope that work on developing a more strategic, better governed approach to supporting young people and communities can move forward at pace. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Kirk. I'd now like to invite Councillor Elizabeth Wright, Executive Member for Children, Education and Families, to address us. Thank you.
Chair, thank you. I want to comment today in particular about the proposal to develop a youth empowerment grant scheme with our Youth Advisory Council and that about their involvement of the young people in this work, because there has been a disappointing narrative developing around this proposal. Some comments made publicly in recent days have suggested that young people should not be trusted to contribute meaningfully to discussions about local funding priorities. I fundamentally disagree with that. Let us be absolutely clear about what this report proposes. This is not about handing over council decision making to young people without governance or oversight. The report clearly sets out that the scheme will operate within the council's established grant framework, with officer support and proper accountability remaining in place. What this proposal does do is recognise that young people should have a voice in shaping opportunities, services and activities that directly affect their lives and communities. And frankly, I think that this is exactly what we should be doing. As councillors, we regularly talk about wanting young people to engage positively in their communities, to develop civic responsibility and to feel connected to local democracy. But we cannot ask young people who are representing all 4 areas of Northamptonshire to step forward, represent their peers, give up their time and contribute thoughtfully to local discussions, only to then dismiss them as incapable when their involvement becomes meaningful. That sends entirely the wrong message. The members of our Youth Advisory Council are thoughtful, committed and community-minded young people. They care enough to get involved and they deserve encouragement and support, not to be spoken about as though they are unable to understand challenges facing their own communities. In many cases, our young people understand these pressures better than we realise because they are living them every single day. I also think it is important to address the suggestion that community organisations will somehow be left without support. Contrary to some of the comments again being made publicly, there are grant funding available for a range of programmes, charities, trusts and external funding streams, and organisations are not being abandoned. What we are discussing here is how a proportion of council taxpayers' money is used locally, and I think residents rightly expect us to ensure that money is targeted, transparent and focused on achieving positive outcomes for communities, including children and young people. This proposal does not weaken democracy, it strengthens it. Because democracy is not something that suddenly begins at 18. It is something we encourage and nurture over time by showing young people that their voices matter and that constructive participation is welcomed. As Executive Member for Children's Education and Families, I make no apology whatsoever for supporting young people to have a meaningful role in shaping the communities that they live in. Residents rightly expect us to invest in prevention, opportunity and positive activities for young people, and that is exactly what this proposal helps to do. Because if we genuinely want the next generation to care about their communities, then we must first show them that their communities care about them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Any other members wish to add to that contribution? I can't see any other members. Councillor Kellett, you're most welcome.
Thank you, Chair. There's been a lot of words and some of them have been very, very thoughtful. There's not much I can add from what Kirk said and Elizabeth said, but with the governance in place, I think this is an amazing message that we're putting out to our young people, that we've actually got trust in them, okay? We want to bring them into, bases of the council, give them leadership skills. But this money also, these people come from these communities where this money needs, right? And I think with the freshness of youth, the energy, I think we'll get actually more money, more buck for our money by letting these people engage, and it will be controlled properly by governance. That's all I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, and I do know that members of that youth Council will be watching very closely this debate on YouTube, probably on catch-up. So with that, with no other members wishing to add, the recommendations are set out on page 22 of the agenda pack. They've been moved and seconded. Please may I have a show of hands for those in favour.
That's all in favour, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. I'm now going to take a comfort break. Do you mind? We'll take a comfort break for 10 minutes to allow people to leave or stay. You're more than welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. So we'll catch up in 10 minutes. Thank you ever so much. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. So I'd now like to introduce agenda item 5, the Capital Programme Update 2025-2026. I'd like to invite Claire Edwards, Executive Director of Finance, to introduce this report. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to request and note approvals for the capital schemes that have come forward for inclusion into the capital programme during the year. I'll take you to section 5 of the report, which outlines some addition budget requests and also to note down some drawdown of budgets, in particular those at section 5.3, which is referencing the Corby Innovation Centre, which is also on the agenda as a separate report. Otherwise, I'm happy to take any questions, but take you to the recommendations as set out in section 3. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'd now like to invite member debate from the floor and any questions to Councillor Graham Cheatley. Over to you, Graham.
Chair, this report isn't just about updating the capital programme. It's about how we turn our plans into real, visible improvements for residents. It shows in practical terms how we're delivering on the priorities we've set out in our corporate plan. And when we talk about families, strengthening communities, growing our economy and delivering smarter, faster, fairer services, this is exactly what that looks like on the ground. We're investing in families through projects like additional SEND provision at Urchester, making sure children can get the support they need closer to home. We're strengthening communities with improvements to libraries, community centres and local facilities, the things that keep places connected and resilient. We're supporting prosperity through schemes like the Corby Innovation Hub, which Claire's just mentioned, helping create jobs, growth and opportunity locally. And we're doing all of this in a responsible way, making full use of external funding like grants and Section 106 payments. So we bring investment into the area without putting unnecessary pressure on council taxpayers. That doesn't happen by accident. It comes from clear priorities, strong governance and a disciplined approach to what we choose to invest in. We also have to be honest about the challenges. The financial environment remains difficult. Costs are higher and pressures haven't gone away. But what this report shows is that we are managing those pressures carefully, with proper oversight, clear accountability, and a real focus on delivery. And for this administration, that is what matters most. Because our job isn't just to approve plans, it's to make sure we deliver real improvements that people can see and feel in their everyday lives. This report gives me confidence that we are doing exactly that. So I'm very pleased to propose this report and support the recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Elizabeth Wright.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm pleased to second this report. Investment through our capital programme is about improving the everyday lives of residents across North Northamptonshire. That includes local projects such as Rawn's Library, which continues to play an important role at the heart of the community, alongside investment in education and SEND provision within our schools. The development of SEND units is particularly important, as outlined in the investment in the Avenue School in this report. It means more children can receive support closer to home, within their own communities and in environments better suited to meeting their needs. As councillors, we have a responsibility not only to approve investment, but to ensure projects are delivered properly and provide long-term value for our residents. Residents rightly expect to see progress, and this programme helps ensure that investment translate into real outcomes on the ground. So I am pleased to second this report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kirk-Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to briefly welcome the Section 106 investment in Rawn's Library as ward councillor, alongside Councillor Wright for Rawn's. This is something I really care about. Libraries are a vital community asset, obviously, and this funding represents a real and positive step forward for a facility that serves many of our residents across the town, and I'm grateful to see it included in the programme. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members wish to add anything? Well, I will. Schools, libraries, children, SEND. I remind everybody of our corporate plan, family, community and prosperity. I fully commend this report. The details are set out on pages 22 of the agenda pack. They've been moved and seconded. Please may I have a show of hands for those in favour.
That is unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Now we come to agenda item 6, which is where I think the Corby Innovation Hub will actually be mentioned. So with that, I'd now like to invite George Candler, Executive Director for Place and Economy, to introduce this report. George.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. The report that you have in front of you this morning is primarily seeking approval to progress the procurement of stock condition works at Corby Innovation Hub. Going into a little more detail with regards to the report, this is one of 3 of our business centres that the Council operates across Northamptonshire, and it's a mix of office and industrial space, 73,000 square foot in totality. It has a 93% occupancy rate, which is extremely high. It generates £760,000 per annum in rental income, which is key to our overall budgets here at the Council, and has over 200 users in it every single day, so very much supporting and growing the local economy here in Northamptonshire. The report itself is seeking approval to commence the procurement of capital works required to the building and to replace some key end-of-life mechanical and electrical systems, some fire safety elements. It's also looking to undertake some replacement lighting, refurbishment of offices and toilet provision, to name some other areas as well. A number of tenant leases are expiring in the next 12 to 18 months, and this investment therefore supports officers in those lease discussions as we continue to secure their ongoing occupancy and to maintaining that high occupancy rate. In terms of the finances, there is £1.5 million budgeted in place within the capital programme as previously approved in the capital report, and this is part of the 2026-27 capital budget. In terms of risks, these are detailed as 7.4 of the report, and highlight that investment, of course, doesn't automatically guarantee income. Tenants can choose to leave at the end of their lease at any time, but not investing will mean a breach of lease covenants and obviously reducing the potential income that we can generate for this building. Thank you, Chair. That concludes the summary of this report.
Thank you. Please may I have a mover? Councillor Ken Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this is a vital investment in one of our income-generating greatest assets, I think. Over the years, we've spent very little on maintenance of the Corby Innovation Hub, but now we need to protect this very good and ongoing source of income, which is within £750,000 each year. The investment forms a part of the MTFP, and this report is really just to approve the commencement of these works. The money raised in income per annum goes back into providing services for our residents. In order to protect this valued source of income, we now need to carry out servicing to heating, ventilation, air conditioning plants. I therefore, Chairman, propose that we endorse and carry out the necessary servicing and repairs for the hub and protect our very valuable source of income. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jan O'Hara.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add that I'm very pleased to support the procurement of the stock condition works and endorse such a well-used and well-loved business space which conveys the respect and enhancements of collaboration and support of our local businesses. This is an investment in our local businesses, in our communities and in our people, so I'm very happy to support this. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other members wish to add anything? Well, I see this as another investment in Corby, a welcome investment for business, for entrepreneurs, And again, I fully support the recommendations as detailed on page 30 of the agenda pack. They've been moved by Councillor Harrington, seconded by Councillor O'Hara. Please may I have a show of hands for those in favour?
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. I'm getting my order right here now. So we're now coming to agenda item 8, which is the annual delivery plan and enabling strategies. We have some speakers on this. I'd now like to invite Councillor Simon Fairhall to address the meeting. Simon, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement. Thank you.
Thank you. I have said in other meetings, and happy to repeat again, that I welcome the introduction of the annual delivery plan, now with the enabling strategies, and the commitment to Corporate Scrutiny Committee receiving updates and having the opportunity to scrutinise. I think that the strategic delivery framework is clear, but I do wonder about the connection between the annual delivery plan actions and the performance management framework 26-27 KPI set. So in one, we've got 77 actions, 240 year one actions. I hope I've counted them up correctly. And in the other, we've got 22 organisational KPIs and 39 corporate KPIs. I've worked through both sets of information. I have to say I'm struggling to correlate and understand, but I do recognise the ADP is a new document, a new piece in the structure, so I'm not expecting things to be done immediately. But in terms of some of the content of the annual delivery plan, as the thing has been clear, so I'm going to pick up on cherry picking some of the bits I like in it. Why not? I think it's been clear from my contributions across the last year, my priority concern is around access to services to those living in my rural ward, some distance from NNC centres. So the following will be of little surprise. FAM 0207, the Year 1 actions refer to planning future school places effectively and responding to growing demand. My understanding of currently predicted demographics, discounting housing developments, is that there is to be a drop in children numbers, and I have a concern for smaller rural schools such as those in my ward, and I wonder if this is a matter included in the education organisational strategy and what steps can be taken to keep schools open. COMO 103, parts of my ward, and particularly the largest village, Kingscliff, has negligible bus provision, and I wonder how I or these communities can engage in the debate about where new services might be established. Aside from these two, I was pleased to read a number of proposed actions that might respond to my priority concern, and I look forward to tracking them, and I hope contributing to the progress of them. Finally, COMO 604, NNC Staff Volunteer Scheme. Absolutely commend it, but I very much hope that the scheme prioritises regular volunteering over one-off volunteering, as from my experience, that's where the greatest need is, in community groups, clubs, and the whole array of them. One-off is wonderful and does still attract interest and contributions. Regular, I think, is under real pressure. Who wants to be treasurer? Who wants to be secretary? Who wants to give up regular time? So I think if the volunteer scheme could help and support that, that would make a real difference to a whole host of community groups across the area. Thank you.
And thank you for that. I'd now like to invite Lynn Buckingham to address the meeting. Lynn, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement.
Thank you very much again. Chair, this is an important and genuinely welcome piece of work, because it shows Council beginning to mature organisationally and strategically. For a long time in local government, there has often been a disconnect between high-level political ambition and the day-to-day reality of delivery. What this annual plan delivery plan and the enabling strategies attempts to do is to create that golden thread running from the corporate plan through to service plans and ultimately staff objectives and delivery on the ground. That is good practice and reflects recommendations previously made through the LGA peer challenge process. There are several positives here. Firstly, the Council is clearly trying to move away from silo working towards more of a one Council approach, particularly around workforce, digital customer experience and communications. Secondly, the recognition that the plan should remain flexible and responsive to changing pressures is sensible given the financial and operational pressures facing local government nationally. Thirdly, I welcome the commitment to ongoing scrutiny involvement, because scrutiny can add real value in helping shape and test those enabling strategies over time. However, there are also areas where this framework now needs to develop further if it's to become truly outcome-focused. At present, the paper is much stronger on a structure and process than it is on measurable outcomes. The next stage must be to ensure that each major action within the delivery plan is supported by clear KPIs, baseline data, measurable targets, timescales, cost implications and risk indicators, but also those impacts of what we're doing. Otherwise, there is a danger that delivery becomes difficult for members and residents to objectively assess. I also think there's more work needed around transparency and reporting frequency,
30 seconds.
Given the scale of transformation. Overall, though, this is a constructive and positive step forward. The challenge now is to ensuring the framework evolves from being a delivery structure into a genuinely measurable performance and accountability framework that residents can clearly see delivering results in communities. Thank you.
And thank you for that, Lynn. I'd now like to invite Guy Holloway, the Assistant Chief Executive, to introduce this important report.
Chair, thank you very much. And I know it's not my role to respond to the comments of the public gallery, but thank you, because there's some really helpful comments there. And so I'm really pleased, Chair, to be able to present this report, because it's it's introducing the first annual delivery plan and set of enabling strategies to the Executive and for the Council, as has been pointed out, which, as members will know well, the corporate plan went through Council, was approved at Council back in December, and that set out a 4-year strategy for the Council. What the annual delivery plan does, and I suppose the hint is in the title, is it breaks it down into a 12-month window, so it provides more detail, more transparency about where the Council's going, so more of the what is going to happen, when that's going to happen, and who is actually going to drive it forward. So really it's about increasing ownership, it's about adding pace to delivery, but also allowing scrutiny and really making sure it's really, really clear what the Council's doing. Supporting the annual delivery plan is a set of enabling strategies. And again, it's the first time we've had a set of enabling strategies. So important areas like workforce, really important asset for the Council, our colleagues, technology and digital. We've also got customer experience, communications, and also finance. And I would point out, Chair, that the medium-term financial plan, the financial strategy, was approved separately as part of a separate process earlier this year, but members will be well aware of that. Just some points I wanted to highlight, if I may. If the annual delivery plan sets out the what, the enabling strategies set out the how. That's a really important point about the right culture, the One Council culture, but the approach that we're taking to drive services forwards. Also, we were really keen to take on board feedback from the LGA, the Local Government Association Peer Challenge, which recommended that we strengthen that link between high-level strategy and operational delivery. And to assist with that, there have also been some other improvements that have been made to improve the service planning arrangements and the appraisal arrangements in place to really make sure that the strategic priorities in the corporate plan filter through into operational service delivery. And what we're also looking to do, Chair, is to keep executive members up to speed with progress, to produce an annual report on progress, and to keep the Corporate Scrutiny Committee appraised of how we're doing as well. So some really helpful and useful steps ahead, and we've set out some next steps in the report, Chair. I think the other thing is I have the pleasure of presenting this report, but this is a report produced by many officers in conjunction with exec members and with Corporate Scrutiny Committee. So I'd like to just give a shout out. I don't want to embarrass colleagues, Chair, but I will. Marie Devlin Hogg and Simon Mills, two of our excellent assistant directors who've helped to write the enabling strategies, are here. And also Laura Hannam, who's really worked on the annual delivery plan, working with service areas to make sure that it's built in and owned, not just bolted on. So I just wanted to say thank you, and it's very easy for me to come along, but it really is a team effort. Chair, I'm going to cease there because I'm sure members will have things that they want to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Guy. And I'd also like to thank the public speakers for their comments, and also acknowledge Councillor Simon Fairhall, who's also made really helpful comments at the Corporate Scrutiny Committee back in February when this item was considered. And Lynn Buckingham, who made a very real and welcome mention of the importance of our One Council culture. As we all know, the Council set out its future strategic priorities of family, community, prosperity, and providing smarter, faster and fairer public services in its corporate plan that was unanimously adopted at full Council in December of this year. I normally hold a copy up, but I'm afraid it's turned into a bestseller and I've run out of copies, so I do apologise for that. The corporate plan set out a 4-year strategy, and as this report explains, the annual delivery plan appended to this report breaks the corporate plan down into annual bite-sized chunks. The aim is to improve transparency of the Council's plans, strengthen the link between the ambitions of the Council and the actions that it takes, and quite simply, gets things done. I have to say that the annual delivery plan does set out a very comprehensive and ambitious set of actions. The fact that the actions are linked back to the Council's priority themes will help both with the future monitoring and reporting, and in focusing the Council's workforce and resources on key actions that are important to Northamptonshire. And I commend the officers, all of the officers that have been part of the production of this. I think an important thing is to say that colleagues have not waited for the annual delivery plan and enabling strategies to be endorsed here. Colleagues are cracking on and delivering the actions and approaches set out with the plan and strategies. And this is very much reflected in the fleet of foot approach that we have as a council. I'll let Graham and Brian talk about the technology, the customer services and the workforce strategies if they wish to, which I think are excellent, by the way. But I will say a few words about the communications strategy appended to this report. For me, the communication strategy is about something very simple but really important. It's about how we talk with our residents and not how we talk to them. The communication strategy represents a real shift. It's about being more open, more human, and more proactive in how we communicate. We recognise that people expect information to be clear, timely, and easy to understand, and that we need to meet our residents where they are, whether that's online, on social media, or in their local communities. I particularly like the focus on plain English. I believe in plain English. Transparency and trust. Those are exactly the qualities we need if we're going to build strong relationship with our local communities. Ultimately, good communication underpins everything we do as a council. This strategy helps ensure that residents, staff, partners, town and parish councils and all of our stakeholders not only understand what we are doing, but also feel engaged, informed and confident in the services that we provide. I would like to thank again our talented staff who've worked on the annual delivery plan and supporting enabling strategies. I would also like to acknowledge the work of our talented in-house designer who has made the enabling strategies look so good. The strategy documents really stand out, and I'm sure that will help with their communication and spread. I'm really pleased to support all the documents appended to this report. Thank you very much. Any other members wish to speak? Councillor Graham Cheatley.
I'm very pleased to second this report. At its heart, this is about something quite simple, but also significant. namely making sure we deliver what we've promised to our residents. So, as has already been said, we've already agreed our corporate plan, which sets out what we want to achieve over the coming years, supporting families, strengthening communities, and growing our local economy and improving public services. But residents don't just want plans. They want to see things actually happen, and this annual delivery plan is how we make that happen. It takes those big ambitions and turns them into clear, practical actions. What we will do this year, what we will change, and how people will see the difference in their everyday lives. For example, it includes improving roads and fixing potholes faster, something that this administration is already delivering better. Making it easier for people to get help when they need it, supporting young people and families earlier, and improving customer services so people don't get passed from one place to another. So this is about real, visible improvements. What's also important is how joined up this approach is. This plan creates a clear line from what we agree here to what services deliver, and right down to what staff are working on day to day. And that matters because it means the whole organisation is working in the same direction. I also want to highlight, it's already been mentioned, the enabling strategies covering things like our workforce, technology and digital, customer experience, communications and financial planning. And I've read those documents twice now, over and over, and as the leader says, they are striking documents, and I would recommend you all read them. And thank you to all of the officers who have had the input into those documents. These make sure that we have the right people, tools and systems in place to actually deliver this plan. Without that, it simply wouldn't work. It's also right to recognise the role of scrutiny. They've already reviewed this work and will continue to hold us to account, quite rightly, as it's delivered. That helps make sure that this is about action, not just words. From a financial point of view, this is exactly the right approach. It focuses our resources on what matters most and helps ensure we deliver services as efficiently as possible. So for me, this is about being clear, being open and being accountable. It sets out what we will do, how we will do it, and how we will report back. Put simply, it's about turning plans into action and making sure residents see the difference. So I'm very pleased, Chair, to support this report and its recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Councillor Brian Benneworth.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My contribution is going to be a bit more ad lib, but based on my professional expertise has been a Chartered Fellow of the Institute of Professional Development. So I just wanted to particularly focus on the workforce strategy, which unlike you, I do have a copy, which it may become a bestseller within my professional body. But I just wanted to say that, I have put together workforce strategies and over many years in many different organisations and sectors. This is probably the finest that I've seen over that time, and I just wanted to commend, I know she's sitting behind me, but Marie, you've done an excellent job, and I thank you and the team for it. So notwithstanding that, the other enabling strategies I also think are of the highest quality, so I would like to commend the officers as well. But this is comprehensive, it is integrated, and it is aligned with our corporate strategy and responsibilities. So I just wanted to say a huge well done. Thank you.
Thank you for that contribution. Any other members wish to speak? Well, I'm delighted to propose the report as detailed, seconded by Councillor Cheatley. Please may I have a show of hands for those in favour?
Councillor Wilcox. Now that's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Being fleet of foot, we'll move on to agenda item 9, the Northamptonshire Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Strategy 2026 to 2030. I'd now like to invite Sil Paul to address the meeting. Sil, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement.
I am formally asking that financial abuse is explicitly included within the Northamptonshire domestic abuse and sexual abuse strategy. At present, it is not clearly recognised, and that gap has real life-changing consequences. This is not just policy to me, it is my lived reality. At 19, I was in a relationship where control began, ways that didn't look like abuse. I was told it wasn't that bad. I wasn't allowed a phone, I was prevented from working. I was isolated from others. Slowly, my independence was taken away until I no longer had the means or the confidence to leave. Because it didn't look like abuse, no one treated it like abuse, so I stayed. Over time, I lost my confidence, my identity, and my voice. The abuse didn't start with violence, it started with control, isolation, and financial restriction. Because those warning signs were not recognised, it escalated. By 22, it had become physical and life-threatening. I nearly lost my life that day. I escaped with my 3-year-old child into a women's refuge. My child witnessed that trauma and a near-fatal incident, something no child should ever experience. Looking back, financial abuse was the foundation. It removed my independence and kept me trapped. If it had been recognised earlier, I believe I would have left much sooner. This is why this matters, because a decade later, I am still seeing the same failures. I recently supported another woman who did exactly what we want victims to do. She left before it came physical, yet she was not believed. She was made to feel like a nuisance by the housing option officer responsible for all domestic abuse cases. Her experience was minimised because she had not been physically attacked yet. This shows that abuse is still too often only taken seriously once it leaves visible marks. By then, the damage is already done. Financial abuse is not a lesser form of harm. It is recognised in law under the Domestic Abuse Act 2021 as economic abuse. It is a core part of coercive and controlling behaviour. It removes independence, creates dependency and traps people. If we fail to recognise it early, we are not preventing abuse, we are allowing it to escalate. Including financial abuse clearly within this strategy is an opportunity to intervene earlier, protect people sooner and prevent situations from reaching crisis point, but inclusion alone is not enough. How will it be implemented in practice? How will you ensure staff recognise financial abuse? How will you ensure victims are believed the first time they ask for help? Policy means nothing without accountability. Right now, victims are being dismissed. There must be a clear commitment to training, accountability and consistent standards, with empathy at the centre of every response. No one should have to wait until they get physically harmed to be taken seriously. I am asking you to act now. Recognise financial abuse from the beginning, name it clearly within the strategy and ensure it is understood and responded to in practice. Because this is not just about improving a document, it is about whether someone leaves early and safely or stays until it's too late. Thank you.
And thank you very much for that. I'd now like to invite Councillor David Baker to address the meeting. David, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning again, everybody. Many thanks to everyone involved in developing this strategy. In an ideal world, we wouldn't have this strategy. Sadly, however, it is much needed, and the figures on page 17 of the strategy evidence that. There was a victim in every one of those 17,572 domestic abuse-related incidents and crimes referenced on page 17. And we should never lose sight of that behind the numbers. I want to focus on a specific form of domestic abuse that is currently not immediately obvious in the strategy, and that is economic or financial abuse, and which is something that the previous speaker has just mentioned, and that I also spoke on when the draft strategy was presented to P&E scrutiny on the 2nd of April. Under the Domestic Abuse Act of 2021, economic abuse is now clearly recognised as a core form of domestic abuse. It is a form of coercive control, where money is used as a way to control or cause harm to someone, often the mechanism that traps victims by controlling access to money, sabotaging employment, forcing debt, or restricting housing options. Without financial independence, leaving an abusive situation is much more difficult. In many cases, in fact, it's impossible. Survivors' experiences also highlight economic abuse as a factor which continues to impact upon them after leaving the perpetrator. Whilst I would have preferred to see a dedicated section in the strategy on economic abuse, I am heartened to hear from my recent liaison with officers that economic abuse will feature in the NNC associated action plan that will stem from this strategy, and that officers will also liaise with their counterparts in the West to introduce a specific reference to economic abuse on page 8 of the strategy in the context of the statutory definition, so that is positive. This is very important though, because it will mean that frontline staff should be trained to recognise it, services will be commissioned to address it, and survivors should receive the financial advice and support that they need. I would also make reference to page 26 of the strategy to a zero-tolerance commitment across council leadership, which I also think is incredibly important. Actions have consequences, and those in a position of leadership and authority are expected to set standards, for those standards to be followed, and for those standards to be cascaded down to all staff. Thank you, Chair, and I'm sure that we all sincerely hope that we can sit here again in 2030 and see the KPIs listed in the strategy having been met. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and God willing, that is the case. Thank you for that, Councillor Baker. I'd now like to invite Lynn Buckingham to address the meeting. Lynn, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement.
Thank you very much. I might get over a bit, but please excuse me. I'm so disappointed that the recommendations put forward by the Police and Environment Scrutiny, at which this was discussed widely, have been totally disregarded. New figures released in a Safe Lives annual report in March 2025 should stop every public body in this country in its track. For the first time, suspected suicides linked to domestic abuse have overtaken intimate partner homicides. 98 people, 98 human beings who survived abuse, coercion, fear and trauma, but did not survive the aftermath. And the most chilling part is this. Frontline services and survivors have been warning us about this for years. Domestic abuse, mental health and suicide cannot continue to be treated as separate issues handled by separate departments under separate frameworks. Housing looks at accommodation, adult social care looks at care needs, mental health service look at crisis threshold, safeguarding looks at immediate risk. Children's services look at the child, police look at incidents. Meanwhile, the survivor is left carrying the entire weight of trauma across fragmented systems that often do not properly speak to one another. This is where gatekeeping becomes not just poor practice, but potentially dangerous. Because when a survivor finally asks for help and is told, "You're adequately housed, come back when matters worsen, there's no priority need, you made yourself intentionally homeless," or "this doesn't meet the threshold," what messages are we actually sending? Go back to the abuse, you're not being believed? That is not prevention, that is managed deterioration. Safe Lives are warning us that coercive control, psychological abuse are driving suicide risk. Yet many systems still fundamentally assess risk through visible crisis, physical injury, or immediate violence. But psychological collapse does not always arrive with bruises.
30 seconds.
It arrives through isolation, fear, hopelessness, housing insecurity, children uprooted from schools, repeated retelling of trauma, loss of support networks, tenancy instability, and survivors feeling trapped between systems that each only hold one piece of the picture. How can this be safe?
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Lynn. Thank you. I'd now like to invite member debate from the floor. Councillor Greg Wilcox.
Chair, colleagues, I am pleased to bring forward the domestic abuse and sexual violence strategy for 26 to 30, and I want to begin by thanking Scrutiny, all the public speakers we've just heard, survivors who have contributed so powerfully to its development. This is a strong, evidence-based strategy, and Scrutiny was clear in recognising its scale, its ambition, its partnership approach, and its commitment to safe accommodation and to children as victims in their own right. That endorsement matters. But Scrutiny also challenged us rightly to be honest about where the system does not always work well for victims and where our response must improve. And I want to be equally clear that I welcome that challenge. We heard very clearly that for some victims, accessing support can feel harder than the abuse itself, that people do not always feel believed or heard, and that experiences of temporary accommodation, particularly within housing, can be re-traumatising rather than protective, especially when placements are unsafe, unsuitable, or detached from the victim support networks and children's schools. The feedback has been taken seriously. It reinforces exactly why this strategy matters. The answer is not to step back from ambition, but to embed trauma-informed practice more deeply, particularly within housing, and to ensure that safe accommodation is provided in the context of trauma, not simply to discharge its duty. Scrutiny also asked us to be bolder on outcomes. In particular, the committee was clear that a 75% of victims feeling believed and supported is not ambitious enough, and I agree. That target will be strengthened because of our aspiration must be closer to 100% as is humanly possible. There was also constructive challenges around the KPIs, for example, the need for annual milestones, not just endpoints at 2:30. Clarity around what success looks like for underrepresented groups and urgency around refuge provision. Those points are well made, and the action plan will reflect them, including a return to scrutiny once they are finalised. Scrutiny also asked us to be clearer about financial abuse, including its impact on children, about the referral pathways to specialist advice. That will be strengthened in both the narrative and the contacts listed. On prevention, members made helpful suggestions around white ribbon, parish and town councils, workplace training and awareness during major sporting events. These ideas align strongly with our direction of travel, and they underline that prevention must be visible, local and continuous, not just campaign-based. Importantly, the committee reinforced that this strategy must not remain a document on a shelf. That is why governance and accountability and delivery sit at its heart. There will be annual reporting, a midpoint review and clear ownership across partners. As executive member, I am clear about the responsibility here to provide political leadership, to ensure we meet our statutory duties, and to hold the system to account whenever it falls short, especially when victims are not treated with dignity or belief. This strategy does not pretend that domestic abuse and sexual violence can be solved quickly, but it does set a clear survivor-led direction. It shifts responsibility onto the perpetrators, it priorities prevention, and it commits us to building back trust where trust has been lost. I commend this strategy to the executive and ask for your support in adopting it, not as an endpoint, but as a framework for sustained, accountable action over the next 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and I'm mindful that I ought to let Jane Bethea, the Director of Public Health, introduce the report, which I'm sure will dovetail into what Councillor Greg Wilcox has said. Over to you, Jane, and do apologise.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths, and Councillor Wilcox has eloquently stolen some of my thunder But it's really important points that were raised. And I firstly wanted just to address a couple of comments from questions and points that have been raised. I firstly wanted to thank the member of the public who has shared so eloquently their own experiences. And put that financial abuse in the spotlight. That's really, really important. I'd also like to point out this is a live document, so we can make some changes to make sure that's really clear in there. And I thank both Councillor Baker and also our Speaker for raising that. It is really important. And I think as our member of the public speaker does point out quite rightly that sometimes this is where this abuse starts in terms of how visible it is. So I just wanted to thank speakers for raising those particular points. I also wanted just to address a really important issue that Mrs Buckingham raised, which was around suicide, and suicide that is linked to domestic violence, just to give some assurance that those do come as domestic homicide reviews. And it is very much the case that there's been an increasing focus on making sure they're picked up, as well as people who die directly through domestic violence. Okay, so in terms of the paper to introduce the strategy, I'm here today with many hats on as usual, but I'm here really as chair of Northamptonshire Community Safety Partnership. I'm delighted to present this strategy for 2026 to 2030, which is a county-wide strategy and fits very much with the strategic priorities of the Northamptonshire Community Safety Partnership. The overall vision for this particular strategy is to make Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire a place where abuse is neither tolerated nor hidden, where victims are believed and supported, and where perpetrators are consistently challenged and prevented from causing further harm. As pointed out so eloquently already by our speakers, domestic abuse and sexual violence are sadly not rare. In terms of domestic abuse, in 25-26, Northamptonshire Police had on average 22 incidents of domestic abuse reported to them every day. Nationally, it is estimated that 1.6 million women and 712,000 men aged 16 and over experience domestic abuse. 16% of adults have experienced sexual assault since the age of 16, with 4% being the victim of rape or attempted rape. 2 women are killed by a current or former partner every week, and an estimated 3 women each week take their own lives as a consequence of domestic abuse. Men experience domestic abuse too, and it is estimated that 14% of victims here in Northamptonshire are men, and it is so important that we consider that in terms of meeting the needs of everybody in our population. I won't go through the strategy in detail, but the key elements are early intervention and prevention. This is about a focus on stopping domestic abuse and sexual violence before it happens where we can. Support and protection for victims and survivors, so inclusive and accessible support, no one size fits all. Trust and confidence in services, we need to make sure that people do report the experiences of domestic and sexual violence, and lack of trust can be a major issue. So it's absolutely imperative that victims feel safe, believed and supported. A coordinated community response is absolutely essential. No single agency can tackle abuse alone. Also, as already mentioned by Councillor Wilcox, holding perpetrators to account is essential. We need to ensure perpetrators face consequences and there's a clear stance. Abuse will not be tolerated. The partnership will carefully monitor progress in these areas, and they will also ensure that decisions are informed by data, by input from a range of professionals and crucially with input from survivors. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Do I see a seconder? Councillor Ken Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. I think, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Greg Wilcox. You were absolutely spot on with everything you said. I support the strategy, and I speak as a young boy, I was, in fact, a victim of violent abuse. And I listened to what the young lady said, the first speaker, and I understand exactly what she meant as well. But may I also emphasise, I'd like to emphasise the importance of adults and members of the authorities actually listening to the victims. Many times in years gone by, things were hushed up. And a lot of people did not always want to listen to the victims because it would mean that they would actually have to get involved in confrontation. Therefore, the victims would be told not to be so silly. I am going back a long way when I was a boy. If you know how old I am, you know it's a long, long way back, but they would be told not to be so silly, and things did get brushed under the carpet, no doubt about that. I therefore second this motion and emphasise that we must listen and not be frightened to get fully involved. Chair, thank you.
Thank you for that. We've covered some important reports today. I believe this is probably the most important one because this is life-changing for a number of our residents, and we heard those very graphic and candid figures that Jane has given out. So the recommendations are set out on page 155 of the agenda pack. They have been moved by Councillor Wilcox, seconded by Councillor Harrington. Please may I have a show of hands for those in favour.
Unanimous, Chair.
What I'm now going to do is take our second comfort break of just 5 minutes, if I may, and then we will run through the remainder of the items until completion. Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody. We will now resume at agenda item 10, the Northamptonshire Enforcement Policy. I'd like to invite Councillor Emily Fedorovich to address the meeting. Emily, you have a maximum 3 minutes to make your statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader, and hello again, everybody. So I just wanted to speak on this item. It's something that's very important, and obviously keeping our enforcement policy up to date is very important, and I thank officers for the hard work that's gone into improving this document, outlining our approach. Alongside policy review, I would like to also see us review how we resource this area better and use resources as effectively as possible, which does feed into this policy as well. Council enforcement is only effective when it's timely, consistent and properly resourced. The policy rightly recognises that many enforcement cases involve multiple council departments or external agencies working together. However, this process must be seamless and fast. Whether through dedicated email routes, Teams requests or direct officer contacts, there needs to be a clear and efficient system for collaboration. This doesn't need to be in policy, but it needs to be considered carefully and transparently to us as councillors. If communication is slow or unclear, urgent enforcement matters are at risk of being held up by cases being bounced between departments. In point 3.4, the policy also states that enforcement relies on sufficient evidence, but it does not clearly explain what qualifies as sufficient evidence or how residents can help provide this. Where residents are able to submit usable evidence, this should be encouraged to reduce unnecessary site visits and make better use on limited resources. Empowering councillors with this information with member briefings could also help further amplify resource. Consistency is another important point. The document talks about consistency generally, but not about the importance of the council itself being consistent in carrying out enforcement. Public trust depends on residents seeing rules applied fairly and reliably. The officers we do have working in this area are working exceptionally hard, but at present, a lack of resource in the enforcement department has led to an erosion in public confidence. We regularly see the lack of resource capacity to respond to issues, frequently with fly tipping, littering and bins left on pavements. This is a legal risk for this council if we are not meeting our statutory duties, and it's already an ongoing reputational risk. Enforcement in these areas is often patchy, not because officers are unwilling. On the contrary, they are exceptionally determined and hardworking, but because there is simply not enough capacity. When focused enforcement has taken place, the officers involved have done an excellent job. The issue is not commitment, it is resource. We need enough officers to ensure the council can properly deliver and uphold its own policies. I hope this can be considered ongoing. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Emily. I'd now like to invite Dorothy Maxwell to address the meeting. Dorothy, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement. Thank you.
Hello again. In this report, it clearly maps out what's being done or undertaken by officers, but the public need to know the facts and what is really happening. How many enforcement officers do we have? When looking at the Traveller site in Woodford and Northamptonshire Borough, it seems they have their own way and nothing's done. In Woodford, they rocked up and chopped down 40 trees, and it went to planning, and the rest is history. No replacement trees, and just carry on. There's one law for them and another law for the public. Sadly, the same thing is happening in Northamptonshire Borough, where have taken over council land and continue to do what they want anytime. What is the council to do? Just leave it and continue? Policies are only good as the outcomes, and you do not have the manpower as it is left to continue and get people away with things. One would hope that both these sides...
Just bear with me. Camilla, would you like to...
We've just paused this particular speaker. We must remember to be extremely respectful in our language, especially when talking about those with protected characteristics.
Thank you. However, it seems that nothing is done. Looking at shops, how often are they checked for selling illegal cigarettes, drink and vapes? If you do not have the staff, then that's a problem. We hope that the public is looked after. The officers are doing great jobs. Who knows? Children must be protected. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for that. I'd now like to invite George Candler, Executive Director of Place and Economy, to introduce this report. Over to you, George.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the comments from the speakers. Just to clarify, we have 6 planning enforcement officers. 5 are full-time as part of the restructure that's just been undertaken, and the 6th were out to advert for. So we were up to full strength very shortly, just to answer that specific point. The report in front of you today is seeking approval for a revised Northamptonshire Council enforcement policy. By way of background, the policy was first approved in principle by the then Shadow Executive for Northants back in March 2021, so that was the month before we went into unitary status in April 2021. There have then been some further amendments and input from colleagues. It was approved executive formally in June 2022, and then there was a light touch review also concluded in January 2023. In terms of where we are now, what has actually happened is a one council approach to the work of enforcement. A corporate enforcement group made up of representatives from a range of council areas and council service areas have looked at this. So those service areas include, for example, adult social care, building control, community safety, environmental health, housing, planning, which obviously tends to get the main focus, private sector housing, waste, trading standards and so on. So there's a lot of enforcement, as you can imagine, that goes on across the council, hence the desire to pull this together into one coherent approach. The purpose of the policy is in essence to secure an efficient, proportionate and consistent and ultimately effective approach to all of the regulatory inspection and enforcement activity that this council undertakes. And ultimately, the effect of the policy, the impact it will have is to improve compliance with legislation, whilst also minimising the burdens on businesses that we have across Northamptonshire, individuals, organisations and communities, as well as the council. And finally, as can be seen in 4.4 of the report, the policy aims to address a wide range of issues, and the policy is attached at Appendix A to the main report. Thank you, Chair. That concludes the summary of this particular report.
Thank you for that. I'd now like to open it up for debate, and starting with Councillor Kirk Harrison, Executive Member for All Things Regulatory.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Chair, and thank you to our speakers. In particular, thank you to Councillor Fedorovic. Your points around resources, sufficiency and use of evidence and consistency of application, I think, are really important, and they're well noted. So I appreciate those. I'm pleased to propose this report. I want to briefly highlight 2 things that make this policy genuinely worthwhile rather than simply a procedural update. The first is, I think, the graduated approach to enforcement. The Council should never be in the business of applying arbitrary or disproportionate enforcement action. This policy sets out clearly that we consider all relevant circumstances and we look to achieve compliance before reaching for the harder tools, and that the response to that is proportionate to the situation. This is really, really important to both our residents and the credibility of the Council as a whole. The second point I'd like to make is that we will now have a single unified enforcement policy, as you've just heard, across the whole authority. The co-design and joint working that has gone into producing this reflects exactly the joined-up approach that we should be taking. Rather than disparate policies operating in silos, we've got one coherent framework that officers and members can have confidence in. Enforcement, when it's needed, should be consistent, transparent and fair. This policy, I believe, achieves that, and I'm very, very happy to propose it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Chris McGiffin.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, all. Chair, I welcome the revised enforcement policy, and I'm very pleased to second its proposal. It has a very wide scope. George correctly quoted some of the departments that will be involved in this. But the sort of scope I'm talking about is mentioned in section 2 of the policy. It covers animal welfare, ASB and community safety, council tax and blue badge fraud, environmental health, as Councillor Harrison has touched on. Highways, a topic close to my heart. Housing services, licensing for alcohol, carriages, private hire, taxis, etc., etc. Parking services, a point I'm going to comment on further in a second. Planning, development and building control, private sector housing. It's a very wide scope. If you'll indulge me, I'm going to call out the parts that relate to my portfolio. So I'm especially pleased with the policy because in section 31 it refers to environmental crime with regard to highways. It covers littering and deposits on the highway, abandoning a vehicle, nuisance parking, exposing vehicles for sale on a road, repairing vehicles on a road, and, crucially, vehicles illegally parked. Chair, in January this year, government proposed legislation which will become law later this year, which will allow local highways authorities, of which we are one, to enforce nuisance and curb verge parking where appropriate. I'm pleased that officers are in the process of recruiting more enforcement officers. We have 12 at the minute, including 2 supervisors. A further 4 are either with us already, George, you can confirm, or are scheduled to start with us imminently. That's not the end of it. So, Councillor Fedora, just touching on your point about resource, it's recognised. We're moving on it in certain areas that sit with my portfolio, and we will add to those, especially where it's proven that they're needed. From that, we can then at least start to give attention to the illegal and sometimes downright dangerous parking behaviour outside our schools at pick-up and drop-off times and other elements of antisocial parking which hinder safe movement of, for instance, the visually impaired, wheelchair and disability scooter users, as well as baby carriages and pushchair users, too often forced to move into the road due to antisocial parking. Chair, we live in a rules-based democracy. We need to enforce those rules, and where those rules are disregarded, we need to have the authority to penalise appropriately. I welcome the enforcement of this. I welcome and proudly second this revised enforcement policy. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other members? Councillor Benworth.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to provide some assurance to our public speaker around the issue of illegal cigarettes and tobacco. In our Director of Public Health's annual report that was reviewed by both the Health and Wellbeing Board and full council, there is detail in there of significant cross-agency working called Operation Stop, where there is a significant number of products that were seized. So just to provide that assurance that we do take that issue seriously, and we do work with partner agencies in order to combat as best we can those type of activities. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other members wish to speak? Going back to the staffing, it is really important, and it is evident that we are attracting the right calibre of staff and staff that want to work for Northamptonshire as an employer of choice. And I remind everybody that our turnover of staff is down from as high as 22% to 9%. With that in mind, the recommendations are set out on page 206 of the agenda pack. They've been moved and seconded. Please may I have a show of hands for those in favour.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you ever so much for that. So moving on to agenda item 11, the empty home strategy. I'd like to ask George Kander to return, Executive Director of Place, to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. The new empty homes strategy ultimately outlines this Council's approach to identifying, managing and ultimately bringing long-term empty homes back into use. And ultimately the purpose of this particular report is to seek approval of the strategy so that it can enable our private sector housing officers to utilise the framework of options that are detailed within the report and ultimately to both encourage wherever possible but also to enforce where it needs to happen empty homeowners to bring their long-term empty properties back into use. At any one time, just by way of some data, Northamptonshire has approximately 400 empty properties that have been empty for longer than 2 years. And at present, there is no current formal requirement for local authorities across the country to monitor and report on long-term empty properties. And similarly, there is no mandatory requirement to bring them back into use. But at Northamptonshire Council, we believe it will be good practice to use the powers that we have available to us due to the wider benefits that can be seen within our communities. Over the last 5 years, officers in the private sector housing team have largely been dealing with this particular issue in a reactive manner, i.e. following up on complaints and acting only when they become necessary or indeed urgent. However, more recently, and certainly in the last 18 months, officers have been much more proactive, identifying and conducting internal inspections of all long-term properties that we have to establish the condition of them, to risk rate them accordingly and against a set of criteria. And that's helped us build a picture and a database across Northamptonshire of what we have in terms of long-term empty properties. Therefore, the implementation of the strategy will hopefully reduce those numbers of long-term empty properties across Northamptonshire through encouragement, which is ultimately what we want to do, but also by adopting appropriate enforcement options where we deem those necessary. And you'll see a number of those detailed in section 5 of the report. And just concluding, I just wanted to touch on both consultation and scrutiny in relation to this report. So consultation with regards to the strategy, whilst there's no statutory requirement to consult on how we manage them, a number of questions were drafted and we went out to consultation at the beginning of this calendar year for the public to comment, and we also sent the consultation questions to all of those long-term property homeowners that we have had and have got, but also past complainants as well. And the details are detailed in a link within the report. And secondly, in terms of consideration by scrutiny, the Place and Environment Scrutiny welcomed the strategy from their meeting when it was presented and discussed on the 2nd of April earlier this year. Thank you, Chair. That concludes the summary of this report.
Thank you very much for that. I'll open up to debate. Councillor Kirk-Harrison.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, George, for that really thorough introduction. I'm actually delighted to propose this report, and I want to start by acknowledging the work of Amy Plank and the private sector housing team. They've worked tirelessly on both the strategy and its implementation. And the early results from the proactive engagement are genuinely encouraging. So that's a really, really good start. This is a team that deserves real credit. So I hope that goes out to them. Empty homes are one of those issues that frustrates residents deeply, and quite rightly so. A property sitting vacant for years, where housing need exists nearby, is really, really difficult to justify. As we've just heard from George, thank you, nearly 400 properties in North Northamptonshire have been empty for more than 2 years, and this strategy sets out for the first time a clear and proportionate framework for doing something about it. I'm really pleased to see in our annual delivery plan that the implementation of the empty home strategy is an item that we can tick off today in our fleet of foot approach. I've actually got a personal interest in this area. My professional background spans housing providers, local authorities, and many years ago, actually a frontline role in homelessness prevention. So I understand what empty homes mean in practice, both for the communities and for individuals with a housing need. That experience makes me genuinely excited, actually. It sounds odd, but I'm genuinely excited about what this strategy can actually achieve. The other thing I really like about this, again, is the graduated approach to enforcement. Informal engagement comes first, with enforcement tools available where necessary. This, I think, is the right balance. The strategy also links naturally into the wider housing supply work and supports our award-winning housing options team in addressing homelessness pressures wherever possible. The Place and Environment Scrutiny Committee welcomed the strategy, and the questions raised have been carefully considered and addressed by officers. This is really good work, and I'm pleased to support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Brian Benworth.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Harrison is delighted. I'm very happy to second the recommendations in this empty homes strategy proposal. I believe that this strategy is both timely and necessary. And as we've heard from George and from Councillor Harrison, North Northamptonshire has got around 400 properties that have been empty for more than 2 years. These are homes that represent missed opportunity at a time when housing demand is high, pressures on temporary accommodation are growing, and homelessness services continue to face significant strain. What I particularly welcome is the balanced approach the strategy sets out. It rightly begins with engagement and support for property owners, recognising that many empty homes can be brought back into use through advice, incentives and partnership working. However, it also is clear-eyed in acknowledging that where properties remain long-term empty and are causing harm or disruption to communities, this council will and must be prepared to act. The range of tools proposed, such as enforced sale, empty dwelling management orders, and only where necessary, compulsory purchase, are well-established lawful powers. This strategy makes clear that these will only be used when justified and proportionate. But their inclusion is vital if this policy is to be credible and effective. Empty homes is not a neutral issue. They contribute to antisocial behaviour, reduce community confidence, and loss of economic value. Bringing these properties back into occupation will increase housing supply, support neighbourhood regeneration, reduce pressures on homelessness and temporary accommodation services, and help create safer, more resilient communities. Finally, this strategy has been subject to proper consultation and scrutiny and an equality assessment. It has received strong public support and no significant adverse equality impacts have been identified. Approving it today provides our officers with a clear and lawful framework to act and delivers directly against our corporate plan priorities. So, Chair, for these reasons, I am very pleased to second this report and its recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Any other members wish to add anything? Well, the recommendations are detailed on page 284 of the agenda pack. They've been moved and seconded. Please may I have a show of hands for those in favour.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. We move on now to another housing report, agenda item 12, the Keyways Housing Allocation Scheme Review. I'd now like to invite Lynn Buckingham back to address the meeting. Lynn, you have a maximum of 3 minutes.
Thank you, and I could take a year on this. Chair, this report raises some serious concerns around how some of the most complex and vulnerable housing cases are actually being assessed in practice. particularly around domestic abuse, disability, trauma, neurodiversity and safeguarding. Because whilst the policy talks about reasonable preference, welfare grounds and urgent need, what is much less clear is who is making those decisions, what expertise sits around the table, and what safeguards exist when life-changing judgments are being made. The statutory guidance is very clear that councils must properly assess medical and welfare needs, domestic abuse risk, exceptional circumstances and equality impacts. It also makes clear that authorities should have specialist training and clear decision-making arrangements. But nowhere in this report do I see strong assurance around multidisciplinary oversight, and that matters enormously, because these are not simple housing administration decisions anymore. When somebody presents with domestic abuse, PTSD, autism, ADHD, physical disability, mental health, safeguarding concerns, or complex child's welfare issues, officers are effectively making quasi-clinical and quasi-safeguarding judgments. They are deciding whether somebody is safe, whether somebody's trauma is significant, whether overcrowding is harmful, whether support networks matter, whether accommodation is suitable, and where vulnerability is severe enough to justify priority. So my concern is this: are we quietly moving away from a robust allocations panel, medical panels, or multidisciplinary oversight structures in favour of internal officer-only decision-making? Because if we are, the Council is carrying a very significant legal safeguarding and reputational risk. So my ask is this: can there be formal allocation or review panels, a range of expertise sitting on those panels, that there is clinical, safeguarding or domestic abuse input, ensuring decisions are quality assures, and that members have visibility of outcomes and equality impact, because this simply cannot become a paper exercise driven by pressure and scarcity. Thank you.
And thank you for that. I'd now like to invite David Watts, Executive Director of Adults, Communities and Wellbeing, to introduce this report. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Chair. Can I first thank our housing colleagues Emma Forbes and Samantha Dixon for their diligent work in designing the revised scheme, undertaking the consultation and working closely with their colleagues at West Northants Council to finalise and bring forward the proposed revisions to the housing allocation scheme for the Executive to consider. The scheme is underpinned by clear eligibility rules, banding arrangements and reasonable preference categories, reflecting both local housing pressures and statutory requirements. The updated scheme has been shaped through public consultation, of which the analysis is attached as Appendix E, and it introduces a number of targeted changes to improve clarity, consistency and outcomes. These include refined banding criteria, clearer pathways for priority groups, and strengthened partnership working to make the best use of available housing stock. Emphasised in the revised scheme is enhanced support for care leavers, recognising the additional barriers that they face around access in society, and the Council's commitment to its corporate parenting responsibilities. As a result, the proposals recommend that care leavers from across Northamptonshire are proposed to be afforded Band A priority within the allocations framework through a reciprocal arrangement with West Northants Council, whilst all of the care leavers from outside the county that have no connection to North Northamptonshire will be afforded a Band D. This is supported with improved alignment with support services to help sustain tenancies and promote independence as care leavers move into adulthood. The reciprocity, I should never have used that word, should I? The reciprocity with West Northants Council supports mobility, employment and family connections, whilst maintaining fairness for local residents and efficient use of social housing across both areas. Overall, the proposed updated scheme provides a balanced, modern and partnership-led allocations framework, strengthening fairness, supporting priority groups, particularly care leavers, and reinforcing effective joint working between Northamptonshire Council and West Northamptonshire Council. Chair, that concludes my presentation of the report for Executive's consideration.
Thank you for that. I love reciprocal arrangements, but thanks for that. David. I'd now like to open it up for member debate, starting with Councillor Kirk Harrison, I believe. Oh, I apologise. Councillor Bennyworth. Didn't want to give you a new role, Kirk.
Thank you very, very much, Chair, and thank you, Lynn, for your comments today. I, as ever, do take note of the things that you say, but I'm going to stick to my response. But your comments are always land with me, and I do always consider them. So I just want to give you that assurance. So, Chair, again, I'm pleased to propose this paper regarding the review of the Keyways housing allocation scheme. This is a substantial and well-evidenced piece of work, and the context is critical. Our housing register has grown by 129% in just 3 years, while the supply of available social housing has not grown anything like at the same rate. In those circumstances, doing nothing is neither fair nor sustainable, and it would leave this council potentially exposed both operationally and legally. What this review achieves is a clear refocusing of the allocation scheme on genuine housing need, while remaining fully compliant with the Housing Act and the reasonable preference categories required by law. There are several key improvements that I want to highlight. Firstly, the tightening of access around the housing register so that priority is given to households with a clearly defined housing need. Secondly, a stronger and clearer priority for care experienced people and victims of domestic abuse and households experiencing severe overcrowding. Improved transparency and consistency in banding decisions, helping applicants better understand how and why decisions are made. And finally, the practical operation changes included the expanded auto bidding and increased weekly bidding to ensure that available homes are used more effectively. Importantly, this review was not developed in isolation. It has been informed by extensive public consultation, with a majority of respondents supporting the proposed changes, and by a detailed equality assessment which shows a neutral or positive impacts across the protected characteristics. At its heart, this review is about fairness. It's not about arbitrarily excluding people from support. It is about ensuring that scarce social housing is allocated transparently, lawfully, and to those who need it most, while continuing to encourage prevention, independence, and other appropriate housing pathways. So for those reasons, Chair, I'm pleased to propose the Keyways allocation review, and I ask colleagues to support the recommendations in the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Brian. Over to Councillor Elizabeth Wright.
Thank you, Chair. So I am pleased to second this report. For me, one of the most important aspects of the housing allocation scheme is how we support our care leavers. As corporate parents, our responsibility does not end when a young person turns 18. In many ways, that is where they need us most. Having access to safe, stable accommodation is fundamental to helping young people build independence and move forward with their lives. This scheme recognises that responsibility and ensures care leavers are properly considered within the allocations process. It is about fairness, but it's also about doing what any good parent would do, making sure young people have the foundations they need to succeed. A stable home can make the difference between a young person thriving or struggling. This is why this matters, and so I'm pleased to second this report.
Thank you very much for that. Any other members wish to add anything? Councillor Kirk-Harris.
Can I just say, I was going to speak on this item, but Councillor Wright has very, very eloquently said everything that I want to say, so I just want to back up and endorse everything that she just said.
Thank you. There's no harm in that. Thank you. Okay, so the recommendations are set out on page 348 of the agenda pack. They've now been moved and seconded. Please may I have a show of hand for those in favour.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. We move on to agenda item 13, the local send reform plan submission. I'd now like to invite Councillor Steve Geary, yes he is still here, to address the meeting. Steve, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement.
Afternoon, and thank you very much. So I support the motion. It offers the opportunity to gain substantial support for all the work that we do in this area. Clearly it's part of a bigger picture, and we're talking with the government, and I have reservations not so much in the work that we're doing, because I know and trust the capability of staff to get this work done within the timetables that are required. Where my concerns lie is in the understanding beyond the proposals in terms of the needs of this group of people, potentially reaching 20% of our student population. Many of us have kids in this area or know of parents that have kids that need this support, and it's not to be underestimated the amount of support that's required to people who, through no fault of their own, need a little bit extra support. They are not a problem to be solved. They are us, in a way, and the providers can see send students, if we're not careful, as problems and finance to be dealt with. In terms of the parents who are dealing with these children, fear and fight are words that they so often use. And the families and myself have a great concern that these proposed government changes may not be truly implemented, and the interests behind them are not to support us here in Northamptonshire, but to support the convenience and packaging of support. So I hope we're successful, and I'm sure we are, in generating the required reports that the government asks for, and we get the financial support that we so desperately needed. And I hope that further in the future we take this as an opportunity to advocate for these students in whatever way that we can, and see them always as students and not as problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Geary. I'd now like to invite Adele Wiley, Chief Executive, to introduce this report.
I don't use it very often. Thank you, Leader. And I'm going to hand straight over to the executive member. She's very capable, and so she can introduce and propose this report on what is an extremely important matter for this council and for our children and young people. Thank you.
Thank you. So I am both pleased to present this report and propose this report. So I'm going to assume that all members have read the report, so I don't propose to go through this in detail, so I will take it as read. This paper is asking the Executive to approve delegated authority to finalise and submit North Northamptonshire's local SEND reform plan to the Department for Education by the required national deadline. This is an important piece of work for our local area partnership because it sets out how we intend to improve support for children and young people with SEND over the next 3 years. The report is clear that the reform plan must focus on stronger inclusion, earlier intervention, improved partnership working, and better long-term outcomes for children and young people. Approval of the plan is also critically financially, as it underpins access to the High Needs Stability Grant, covering 90% of our historic DSG deficit, estimated around £45 million. But for me, this goes further. This cannot simply become a technical exercise about governance, structures, plans, and funding submissions. This work matters because behind every section of this report are real children, real families and real experiences of the SEND system. And I do want to acknowledge openly that many families are currently experiencing significant frustration and anxiety. In recent weeks, I've attended the SEND workshop in Kettering and sat with Councillor Geary, who so eloquently spoke just a moment ago. We sat with parents, we sat with stakeholders, and we sat with staff of the council, where we openly talked about the challenges that we have around this plan. I then attended Sendias Future Fest, where I spoke with 3 youngsters about the effect that SEND had had on their lives and how, by putting to the correct alternative provision, it's changed their lives for the better and they feel they have a future. And I've also received correspondence from families raising concerns around communication, annual reviews, transport, direct payments and access to casework support. These are serious concerns for families living through them, and we should recognise that honestly and respectfully. Parents rightly expect communication, accountability and timely support. Where that is not happening consistently, we must acknowledge that improvement is needed. The report itself recognises the wider national context, describing a SEND system that has been under significant and prolonged pressure, with services overstretched and too many children not receiving support early enough. But our responsibility locally is to respond positively to that challenge. Importantly, the reform plan places a strong emphasis on co-production, partnership working and rebuilding confidence with families and young people. That simply cannot sit on paper. It must translate into families feeling listened to, communication improving, and children receiving support in a more joined up, timely and consistent way. I also welcome the focus within the plan on earlier intervention, inclusive mainstream provision and improved access to specialist support through the proposed expert at hands model. If we get this right, the outcome should be fewer children reaching crisis point, more support available closer to home, and a system that works better for families from the outset. But I do appreciate we still have a lot of work to do. This report is therefore an important step in enabling that work to continue at pace and within the national timescales required. Our priority must remain making sure children and young people with SEND receive the support they need to achieve, thrive and reach their full potential. And that is exactly what this reform work must deliver. So I am pleased to propose this report to the Executive.
Thank you for that and well done. Any other members wish to add anything? Councillor Graham Cheatley to second, of course.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was a really comprehensive introduction to that report. So I'm very happy to second this report. At its heart, this is about improving support for some of the most vulnerable children and young people in our communities, those with special educational needs and disabilities. Families will know that the current system hasn't always worked, as Elizabeth has pointed out, as well as it should be. It can be difficult to navigate, support can come too late, and too many children don't get the help that they need early enough. So what the government is asking us to do and what this plan sets out is a clear programme of change. It's about getting support in earlier, before problems escalate, making mainstream schools more inclusive so more children can succeed locally, making sure families can access the right expertise more easily without long delays, and joining up education, health and care services so they work together properly. So this plan is the gateway to real change and also to very significant funding that will help us deliver it, hopefully. If approved, it will unlock funding to deal with our current SEND pressures and invest in better services going forward. So now, because this is part of a national programme, the timelines are tight and the final plan will be shaped by ongoing discussions with government. That's why the recommendations is to delegate final sign-off so we can meet the deadline and not put that funding in risk. Very important. For me, this is the right approach. It's practical, it's necessary, and most importantly, it is focused on improving outcomes for our children and families. So this is about doing the right thing, acting at pace, and making sure we are in the best possible position to deliver real improvements. So, Chair, I'm very pleased to second this report. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The recommendations are set out on page 506 of the agenda pack. They've been moved and seconded. Please may I have a show of hands for those in favour.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Well, I'm mindful that we are reaching the 3-hour guillotine. Can I have a seconder to extend the meeting for 15 minutes? Councillor Kirk Harrison. All those in favour?
Unanimous
okay,
again.
That's
Chair.
done. So then we will now move on to the next item, which is agenda item 14. I do believe the performance management framework for 2026 to 27 and the KPI set. I'd like to invite Councillor Simon Fairhall to address the meeting. Councillor Fairhall, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your statement.
Thank you. A bit of a mirror of my comments earlier on the annual delivery plan, but it's about how this performance management framework 26-27 KPI set relates to the ADP. Although I do note that according to the roles and responsibilities in the performance management framework document, I have none as a backbencher. It rests with executive members and corporate scrutiny. So maybe I could have saved my breath, your time and my weekend study. But no, I haven't. I've reviewed the actions, the year one actions, the organisational KPIs, the corporate KPIs, and I'm struggling with any correlation. I also couldn't see which were the 16 government local outcomes framework priority areas, associated outcome measures and series of metrics. Maybe I'm just being impatient and they're not out yet. I don't know. There were only 12 of the 20 corporate plan priority themes where there was any linked key performance indicator, and only a few of these were clear and obvious. The strongest correlation appeared to be C006 and 007 with COM 01 001, which is probably a very good thing to save you looking up potholes. In studying, I wondered if the annual delivery plan was what we wanted to do, whilst the KPIs was what the government measures us on. An interesting disconnect, technically neither incorrect, but very interesting if this is the case. The KPIs appeared not to be for strengths-based or preventative priority themes, such as ADP says stronger community networks that prevent crises before they happen. Or is it just non-statutory service provision that's missing from the KPIs, e.g. celebrating our heritage and culture and promoting tourism and our town centres? This is all excellent information, by the way. I've enjoyed looking at it generally, and I'm looking forward to sort of hearing more about it. I'm also very grateful that the annual delivery plan is more positively framed, and I'm not sure that in seeking to be an exemplar council, anyone expected us to have to aim for lower scores than other councils in a third of our KPIs on a national misery map. I am, though, very concerned at how we communicate any or all of this, the real nitty-gritty detail of what the council is responsible for. I do think that the guidance paper Appendix D might usefully include a section or complementary paper on how communicating beyond these meetings. As a final aside, I would be keen to learn more about our SIP for nearest neighbours, because if I'd been asked to name 15, I suspect I would have got one, West Northants, possibly two, but not many more. The late statistical neighbours feels far more natural, and I think I might have got closer on that one. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I'd now like to invite Libby Caulfield, our Director of Transformation and Strategy, to introduce this report. Over to you, Libby.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. I'm really pleased to present this report, which seeks executive approval of the updated performance management framework and key performance indicator set for 2026-27. The framework and KPIs have been reviewed to ensure that they remain fit for purpose and are clearly aligned with the Council's corporate plan, as well as emerging national requirements. The changes lead us to a more focused and streamlined approach to performance management in line with our transformation approach, and a key element is a reduction in the number of KPIs formally reported to executive and scrutiny from 160 to 61. The framework provides distinction between corporate and service level indicators and a move to a more accessible dashboard-based reporting framework, making it easier to interpret and use. I'm really grateful that Councillor Fairhall did his study over the weekend, because actually the comments really help us to demonstrate the notion that this framework is not about redefining what we do, but about strengthening how we measure and report it. The updated framework is starting to draw a line of sight between our strategic priorities, delivery activity, and the indicators that we monitor, whilst also recognising that the different tools serve different purposes. The annual delivery plan sets out what we will deliver, whilst the KPI framework focuses provides a focused set of measures to track our performance, including those that we're required to do nationally. Important to note that the framework has been significantly improved by a really good scrutiny process. Some changes were made, particularly around assigning targets to more of the data points, and that's set out for you in 7.7. The framework also recognises up-and-coming changes, including the introduction of the local outcomes framework from April 2026. Overall, the proposed framework strengthens our ability to focus on what matters most, supports more strategic discussion at the executive level, and improves performance information that we can use meaningfully. Thank you, Chair. That concludes the summary of this report.
Thank you very much for that. Open up for debate. Councillor Graham Cheatley.
Thank you, Libby, for that introduction. So I'm very happy to propose this report and its recommendations. I think this is about something quite simple but very important. It's making sure that we know how well we're actually performing and where we need to improve. Residents quite rightly expect us to deliver good services, spend money, public money, wisely, and be open about how we're doing. And this framework is what allows us to do that. Now, I'll say this clearly, but improving how we organise and present our KPIs is something that I've supported from day one of being elected. I just thought there was way too many, very complex, complicated, and I think the whole picture was confusing. In the past, we were tracking a very large number of measures, too many in truth, and that made it harder to focus on what really matters. What we've done here is simplify things and sharpen that focus. We've moved to a much clearer set of key indicators that tell us how we're actually performing in the areas that make a difference to people's lives. And I'll name them. For example, how quickly we support people in need, how we deal with housing and homelessness, how children's services are performing, and how well we collect income and manage our finances, and how easy it is for residents to get help. We've also made the information far clearer, moving to simple dashboards. It means that members can understand performance much more easily, and importantly, residents can also. This isn't just about internal reporting, of course. It's about being open, transparent, and accountable to the public. Another real strength is that performance is now linked much more closely to financial reporting. So we're not just asking, are we doing well? We're asking, are we delivering results and value for money? To be clear, we haven't lost the detail. Services still monitor performance closely, day to day. But at executive level, we are now focused on the key information that drives our decision making. So this is a more focused, more practical, and more transparent approach. So it helps us spot issues earlier, respond more quickly, and ultimately improve services for our residents. For me, this is really an important step forward. It's clearer, more disciplined, and more aligned to our priorities, and it strengthens how we hold ourselves to account. So I'm very pleased to propose this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Chris McGiffin to second.
Thank you, Chair. Very pleased to second this revised performance management framework document. I note its intention to focus acutely on those things which can be objectively measured rather than subjectively interpreted. I refer to lines in place in economy where I find my own portfolio. We see item STP29 as well. So has been removed as it's a simple count of how many defects there are outstanding at the end of each financial period. I actually asked a member of our contractor team, so what? Thanks for telling me. What does it mean? It's been removed because it doesn't allow me to make executive decisions. The measure is a substantially fluctuating one based on seasonal demand and much higher in winter and lower in summer when we catch up with the repairs. On the contrary, STP 30 and 31, as was, now labelled C006 and 7, as Councillor Verhol pointed out, speak directly into the performance measure, i.e. how many defects have we repaired? How does that compare to expectations, to last month, to the same month last year? What decisions do we now take to speed up or manage costs as we interpret that objective measure? Mr. Chairman, when I joined the council last year and was appointed to this role, I was dismayed, frankly, that our performance reporting regime did not give me the information I needed to make informed decisions, or challenge effectively. I now note, with the introduction of the new Power BI reporting, as alluded to here, that sits behind this, and is much closer to best practice and certainly my experience in industry. It allows me to move to a place where I can see where we are, decide appropriately, and project those decisions to the rest of the executive to make appropriate moves forward. I applaud the progress. There's more to do, but I commend the framework to the executive for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I'm looking around, no other comments. So the recommendations are set out on page 564, the agenda pack. They've been moved and seconded. Show of hands, please.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. So moving swiftly on, agenda item 15, the Constitution review. I'd now like to invite Councillor Simon Fairhall back, hopefully briefly, to you have a maximum of 3 minutes. Thank you.
Yep, this one is a bit brief. I think that an organisation aspiring to exemplar status learns from its experience and makes changes, and I believe that this is the case with some of the recommendations in this paper. Specifically, I welcome the adjustment of 5.12 Planning Committee, allowing more than one town or parish council to speak on the same application at Planning Committee, and the proposed adjustment to the petition scheme, reducing the threshold and using discretion for matters which may impact across authorities' boundaries, i.e. counting signatures. Both are illustrative of the fact that boundaries are often unseen as we go about our daily lives. Parishes and wards are not neat boxes, and a boundary should not be allowed to be a barrier. If we are concerned about potential developments across borders and wish to be able to respond, and I can certainly cite examples across in Rutland, South Kesteven, Peterborough, Huntingdonshire and Cambridgeshire that I'm worried about, and plenty of my ward members and constituents are, then I believe that our own approach of not letting a border become a barrier should similarly accept this. I'm also very, very pleased with the proposals outlined in 5.55, 5.6 and 5.7 around corporate parenting. Very pleased that that's come forward and that corporate parenting will now be fully recognised within the Constitution. I'm a little bit concerned by, and I'll wait the interpretation of informal meeting, but I completely and utterly understand the not being open to the public and the live streamed and all the reasons why that's the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Before we have the next speaker, I'm going to extend for another 15 minutes. Can I have a show of hands for those in favour? Okay, and we'll do it. We'll get there this time, I'm pretty confident. So with that, I'd like to invite Lynn Buckingham. Lynn, you have 3 minutes to make your statement. Thank you.
Thank you, and I hope I will do less than that. Chair, thank you. Firstly, I want to welcome the emphasis within this Constitution on public participation, openness and the ambition to be genuinely community-led council. There are positive elements here around public speaking rights, petitions, scrutiny, consultation and access to information. And it is right that residents are encouraged to engage with decision-making. I particularly welcome the continued commitments of the Gunning Principles on consultation, because meaningful consultation must happen early enough for residents to genuinely influence outcomes, not simply comment on decisions it feels already made, especially as one of the earlier agenda items said explicitly that consultation emails had been completely disregarded. I also think it's important that scrutiny continues to be recognised as a critical friend to the executive. Strong scrutiny strengthens decision-making and builds public trust. However, there are areas where I believe we should continue to reflect and improve. For many residents, navigating constitutional processes can feel daunting and procedural. 3 minutes to speak on major decisions affecting communities can feel very limited, particularly when reports can run to hundreds of pages. We should always ask ourselves whether participation is simply being managed efficiently or whether residents generally feel heard and influential within the process. Similarly, the petition thresholds are significant, particularly for smaller communities, rural areas, vulnerable residents, or groups without strong organisational capacity. We must ensure democratic engagement is accessible to everyone, not just those with the loudest voice or greatest resources. I also think there's an opportunity moving forward to strengthen how we measure democratic engagement itself, not just whether consultations or petitions happen, but whether participation changes outcomes, improve policy, or increase public confidence in the Council. Ultimately, a strong constitution is not just about governance rules. It's about culture, trust, and relationships with our residents. If we truly want to be a community-led authority, then residents must feel that participation is meaningful, valued, and capable of shaping decisions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'd now like to invite Camilla Corson-Patel to introduce this report. Thank you, Camilla.
Thank you, Chair. This report details the review of the Constitution which has been undertaken for 2026. The Constitution was adopted in 2021 and has been subject to periodic and ad hoc changes to ensure that it reflects organisational arrangements and remains legally compliant. A comprehensive annual review of the Constitution reported to the relevant decision-making bodies is considered good practice. As the monitoring officer, certain changes can be made in accordance with officer delegations. These are properly recorded and available for public inspection. There are other changes, however, which require approval and adoption by Council. And prior to the presentation to Council, there are consultation and approval routes, specifically Constitution Working Group, Democracy and Standards Committee, and here today at Executive, before the intended presentation to Council in June for adoption. Overall, the changes are focused on clarity, consistency and legal compliance, as well as reflecting the local arrangements rather than substantial policy changes. The Democracy and Standards Committee, within their work programme, have identified areas for focused review during 26-27, which will form part of the updates for the 2027 review. There are also anticipated legislative changes during 26-27, which are likely to require local choice and, in turn, consideration and approval by members. The summary of the changes are presented within the report, where appropriate extracts of the relevant sections have been appended. I do not propose to speak to each change, trusting that members of the Executive have reviewed the reports pack in detail in advance of the meeting. Chair, the recommendations are set out at paragraph 3.1 of the report, and I welcome any feedback from members prior to progressing this report to Council in June.
Thank you very much for that. Well, I'm extremely proud of this Council's consultation process. Also, the ability for members to ask questions at Council, the openness, and obviously with regard to our scrutiny, which was highlighted in the LGA peer review and the Regulator of Social Housing review as very, very positive. Can I also thank Camilla and her team and the Democracy and Standards Committee, who worked really hard on this. It's not for everybody, I have to say, but just congratulate them for doing all the hard graft as far as our Constitution is concerned. So with that, I'm delighted to propose the report. Looking for a seconder. Councillor Chris Kellett.
Yes, this report speaks for itself. It's a very good report, very good work. So I'm very happy to second it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you ever so much. So with that, any other members? No, so we have a show of hands, please, for that item.
Unanimous, Chair.
And that comes to the end of a very long meeting, probably the longest we've had certainly in the last 12 months, but a very worthwhile meeting. Thank you ever so much for your time. Thank you for the speakers who turned out today. It is much appreciated. Have a good remainder of your Tuesday. Thank you.